this buck is going to have the radish. We got to do some cleanup work on him, right? Larry Benoit used to say that. We're going to do some cleanup work on this one buck because he is, and I have educated him. I've smartened him up. But he always seems to stay in this one stretch of woods that's about a mile long, and he normally runs east or west, and he would run to this big chunk of posted land to the east or the big chunk to the west. And whenever I would catch him in the middle, that was my chance to get him. I can see a deer right in front of us, and it's the buck, and he kangaroos probably 8 or 10, jumps, and I holler at him, "Hey!" And he comes to a stop and looks back, and then I grunt. First I had to stop him. Then I give him something to listen to, and he just stands there. So Taylor's scrambling, and I'm like, don't miss. Okay, this is 5 years worth of work. So both of us are standing there with our rifles. And I'm watching that buck, and I finally got him in my crosshairs all this time, but I know he's in his crosshairs. And I said, don't miss, because if you do, this one's coming in. So the two of us are standing there with our rifles up, and Taylor pulls the trigger, and I watch that deer's hide shake, and I said, oh, he's done. And I put my safety back on and lower the rifle, and the deer kangaroos a little ways and then tips over. And that's when, by then, I had the camcorder on, and all of you can watch what happens next on YouTube because we've got that hunt,
nice.
The tail end of it. And us walking up to that deer, and he says to me, Dad, I'm so sorry I shot your deer. And I'm like, shut up, we got to go over and look at that thing.
Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast, episode number 235, the 2018 New England Deer Summit. Support for the Big Buck Registry and the Deer Hunt Podcast comes from Black Ash Outdoor Products. Reduce your risk of tree stand suspension trauma with the Tree Stand Wingman, the Tree Stand Emergency Descender System. The Enforcer. Take control of your odor footprint with your personal ozone generator. Covert Scouting Cameras. Remote cameras for hunting, wildlife, and security. The Horny Buck Seed Company. It's all about the freshest seed. Morse's Sporting Goods. A full line of sporting goods without the sales tax. Northwoods Common Sense. New England's finest whitetail deer lures. 100% fresh, pure, and undiluted. And Big Buck merch. You can get a cool, high-quality Big Buck t-shirts, long-sleeve t-shirts, and hoodies. And show support for this podcast by visiting www.bigbukregistry.com/MERCH. The Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
Hey, this is Hal Blood from Big Woods Bucks, and you're about to push play on my favorite podcast, the Big Buck Registry.
This is Henry Moncrief from Alstead, New Hampshire, and you're listening to my favorite podcast, the Big Buck Registry.
This is Rob Richardson from New Hampshire Shadowhunters Club. You're listening to my favorite podcast of all time, Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow predators. My name is Jay, and thank you for tuning in to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. For Dusty Phillips and Jim Keller and the entire staff here at the Big Buck Registry, welcome to this week's show. There are a couple things I'd like you to do for us if you could. If you would, please check us out on iTunes, subscribe, and leave us a review. With your help, we're going to try and push this show up the iTunes charts. I know we have a lot of listeners out there, and I need you to take some action. I need you to leave a review and subscribe to the show. If you do subscribe, that'll give you access and notification each and every week that a new show is released. You can also access this show in its entirety on YouTube, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Play. It's all right there for you to access on demand at your fingertips. Regarding the harness program, we have an ample supply of harnesses to give away from our volunteer donors. If you're in need of a full-body harness, please send an email to jay@bigbukregistry.com. When I was asked by Fred Allard, the director of the Rockingham Fishing and Hunting Expo, to MC the 2018 New England Deer Summit as part of the event, I couldn't say no. There was an all-star lineup that I would be able to communicate with and capture and dissect the habits and strategies and thoughts of some of the best deer hunters in New England. Certainly, there are other amazing deer hunters in New England, probably some that are listening to the show right now, but this collective I thought was spot on for what we were trying to achieve. On the panel, was Neil Pendleton, Todd Mead, Bobby Sholan, Rodney Elmer, Jim Gallagher, and Dean Vanier. Starting with Neil Pendleton. Neil, a resident of New Hampshire, has 24 years of experience and has hunted in 4 different states, including New Hampshire, Ohio, Massachusetts, and his home state of Maine. Neil believes persistence and passion are the key factors that contribute to his success. Neil currently has 5 collective entries in the New Hampshire and Maine Trophy Big Bucks clubs. Of the 5 entries, 3 were with a bow, 1 with a rifle, and most recently in 2017, a muzzleloader. In 2015, Neil arrowed the buck of a lifetime, a buck he hunted for 1,490 days spanning 5 seasons. Neil was a featured guest on episode 175 of the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast. Todd Mead. Todd was introduced into hunting in the Adirondack Mountains of New York. After years of hunting success in the big mountains, he decided to venture to public lands across the country to see if he could locate and take big bucks in different areas across many states. He hunts primarily with archery equipment outside of his home state, but uses a rifle when he's in the Adirondacks. Todd was also a featured guest on episode 130 of the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast. Todd is also an outdoor writer and author of 3 books about whitetail deer hunting. Bobby Sholan. Bobby was born and raised in the woods of northern Vermont. He has successfully hunted whitetail deer for 23 years now, while bow hunting for whitetail for 20 of those years. He has hunting experience in several states, including Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and even the province of Ontario. Bobby uses trail cameras to target the biggest deer in an area and uses other tools, including maps and year-round scouting. Bobby adapts to the seasons and changing weather, and although has killed more deer with archery, he is able to track in snow and set up on pinch points to ambush unsuspecting bucks. Rodney Elmer. Rodney is a professional taxidermist of 32 years and owner of Mountain Deer Taxidermy. In addition to being a lifelong deer hunter, he is a chief hunter safety instructor and range officer in his home state of Vermont. As an outdoor educator of many years, his straightforward make-it-work hunting styles has earned him many a big New England buck. His rising YouTube channel focuses on common sense, family hunting experiences, love of the natural world, and outdoor education mixed with humor. Jim Gallagher. Jim lives in Methuen, Mass. He shot his first deer with a bow in Vermont when he was 14. Jim's father, unable to walk due to complications with MS, would drive Jim to Vermont every weekend and wait in the car while Jim hunted. For the passion and love of the sport, Jim taught himself how to hunt efficiently and successfully, and to date has harvested 206 deer with a bow. Jim has spent a lifetime testing, developing, and creating an educational bow hunting DVD of his favorite secrets and techniques to help bring others many years of success in hunting whitetails. And finally, Dean Vanier. Dean has over 40 years of hunting experience in the New England woods and 25 years in the deer hunting industry. Dean endlessly shares his wealth of knowledge and surefire hunting techniques in his seminars, including how to use deer scent lures to defeat a whitetail's defense mechanisms, how deer respond to the 3 phases of rut, how to anticipate where deer will be during these phases, and how to bring deer to you. Dean hunts using deer calls, mock scrapes, and deer lures, specifically his own brand of deer scents called Northwoods Common Sense. Dean insists that the future of hunting depends greatly on the youth of today, and it is our responsibility to pass along this great tradition. Dean was featured on 2 different shows, one in 2013 and again in 2014, episodes 18 and 71 of the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast. So from the 6 panelists, we cover a few different topics. We cover, with Dean Vanier, how to use scent as a deer lure. Amongst all panelists, we cover early season, mid-season, and late season tactics. We cover a question from the audience about how to start a mock scrape, and then a general question of what is a shooter buck to each of the panelists. We dive a little deep and discuss the future of hunting and how the youth is important to the future of our industry and heritage, and why it's important to bring the youth into hunting and how do we do it. We cover everybody's favorite hunt. We also handle another audience question about how do you use scent cover and scent control, and who on the panel uses it and who doesn't. We cover the question about how should we handle hunter-to-hunter bashing that occurs on social media, and then we also cover if you could say one sentence of advice to other deer hunters, what would it be? We'll turn to our entire coverage of the 2018 New England Deer Summit in just one moment, but before we do, let's turn to Jim Keller with the Deer News.
For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News. Our first story this week, online outrage after Canadian TV host kills cougar in northern Alberta. This story is from the CBC News Edmonton website. A Canadian TV personality is taking heat online after he killed a cougar in northern Alberta. Steve Eklund, who's the host of the outdoor show The Edge, bragged about hunting the huge cat earlier this month. Eklund hunted the northern Alberta lion with Big Cat Adventures, owned by Brian and Claudette Chorney. Eklund posted several photos of him holding the dead cougar and another of him making a stir-fry from the meat. His posts triggered outrage online. Dozens of people have criticized the post, including former Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper's wife, Laureen Harper. We will not repeat Ms. Harper's tweet, as it is not exactly G-rated. Neither Eklund nor the Chorneys have responded to the request for comments, but he didn't back down in subsequent posts about the hunt. Quote, if you can guess what post has 900 likes, 450 comments, 13 confirmed death threats, 754 swear words, and one very happy hunter in it, I will enter your name into the draw for the new Cougar Cookbook filled with mouth-watering recipes for your next mountain lion hunt, Eklund wrote in a post December 4th. Others on social media defended Eklund's right to hunt the cougar. We invite you to check out Ms. Harper's tweet and respond as you see fit. You can also check out my reply, which is also not exactly G-rated. Her Twitter account is @LaurenHarper, LaurenHarper. Cougar hunting is legal in Alberta from September 1st to the end of February for residents, and from December 1st to the end of February for non-residents. Japanese train barks like a dog to prevent accidents. This story is from the BBC News website. Researchers in Japan have fitted a train with a speaker that barks like a dog and snorts like a deer in order to prevent collisions on the railway. Tokyo's Asahi Shimbun newspaper reports that the combination of sounds is designed to scare deer away from the tracks in a bid to reduce the number of animal deaths on the railway. Officials from the Railway Technical Research Institute, the RTRI, say that a 3-second blast of the sound of a deer snorting attracts the animal's attention, and 20 seconds of a dog barking is enough to make them take flight. RTRI researchers say the late-night tests at times when deer congregate around railway tracks have resulted in a halving of deer sightings. If proved to be effective, future plans include static bark sites where deer are commonly seen, but the noises will not be blared in areas where people live beside the tracks. Mississippi woman bags deer ahead of her 100th birthday. This story is from the Fox News website and was reported by Janine Puhak. On January 9th, Bertha Vickers of Morgantown, Mississippi will celebrate her 100th birthday, but she's more surprised by all the attention she's getting from her recent deer kill. I don't know why everybody is making such a big deal about it, the soon-to-be centenarian and active hunter told the Clarion Ledger. If I'd killed a buck, I could see it, but it was just a doe. On January 5th, the newspaper reported that Vickers recently used a .243 Winchester rifle to bag the animal a few miles from her rural home. Once relatives posted photos of Vickers and her kill to Facebook, messages of congratulations and well wishes soon poured in, the Associated Press adds. For Vickers, however, the kill simply marked another prosperous hunt in the woods. At present, she still cooks, mows her lawn, and maintains the vegetable garden. She often goes for solo jaunts in the woods near her house to hunt squirrels, the Ledger reports. Born on January 9, 1918, Vickers grew up in a farming community in neighboring Oktibbeha County and married Bert Vickers in 1935. Sharing that the Great Depression was a tough time for farmers, the Vickers would go on to have 3 children and enjoy 66 years of marriage, during which deer hunting became a weekly tradition for the couple on Sunday evenings. Bert lost a battle with cancer and passed away in 2001. Bertha kept her passion for the great outdoors and is excited for all that's to come in the new year. Just to get to go and the thrill of catching or killing something is so exciting. I'm going to do just what I want to do, Vickers said of her milestone birthday. I'm going to fish more than I did last year, and I would love to kill a buck. I can't hunt in this cold, but it will still warm up, she added. That concludes this week's edition of the Big Buck Registry Deer News. Special thanks to Daniel Applebaum for his leads on some of the stories this week. For links to the stories featured this week, please check our show notes at www.bigbuckregistry.com. If you have any ideas for future topics or have any questions about any of these topics, please email me at jim@bigbuckregistry.com. For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News.
Thanks to Jim Keller for the Deer News. Without further ado, here's the 2018 New England Deer Summit. We opened the 2018 New England Deer Summit with a question to Dean Vanier. How do we use scent as a deer lure?
Well, I think primarily what people have to remember when you're using scents in the woods is that you're actually communicating with the white-tailed deer, whether it's using calls or scents. A lot of people go out and buy a bottle of Blinkies, Super, what have you, and put it on a stump and look at it for about an hour or two and scratch your butt and say it doesn't work. Well, meanwhile, probably about 70 yards downwind, there's a buck looking at a guy scratching his butt, And that's what they're not paying attention to. I think the key to using any type of deer lure or calls is to know how and when to use it. And of course, you can use it from anywhere, either from drag rags to mock scrapes, which is typically how my wife and I hunt pretty much exclusively, and understanding what you're trying to communicate to the white-tailed deer. This is exactly how they communicate, just like a puppy pees on a fire hydrant. Bucks communicate through scrapes, and so do does.
Excellent. Rodney, you hunt Vermont, and what type of strategies do you use in the woods primarily in early season, mid-season, late season?
For the most part, I generally just walk up to them and shoot them.
That's what I thought you'd say.
It sounds almost laughable sometimes that you could do that, but that's actually what I do. I've dealt with a lot of really crazy deer that are scared of everything. They've been hunted really hard, and over the years, I've also had to deal with a lot of really crunchy and tough conditions, quiet woods, noisy woods, right, if you're walking. But in general, I'll still hunt if we don't have any snow. I'll try and go through movement patterns where deer are or where they're about to be. I refrain away from the deer not moving and me not moving, and the two of us just sit there. I don't want that to happen. I want to have something happen. I generally have a fairly aggressive style to deer hunting. I just go look for them and walk up to them. If I can get close to them and then call to them, that's another thing I like to do. That's a strategy that works pretty good, especially tracking. And if there's snow on the ground, they'll have a hard time getting away. That really works good for me. I've had good luck doing that over the years. I've shot 9 200-pounders in Maine. I haven't gotten a 200-pounder in Vermont yet, but I've got a lot of 180s and 190s right on the edge of it all the time. But it's a lot of fun, and it's a more, for me, I've shot deer in every way there is to do it, but for me, the most rewarding is just walking right up to them, and most of the time I've had good luck doing that.
Okay. So, Jim, let's talk about your strategies. How do you set up through early season, mid-season, late season?
Well, early season, I'm usually hunting deer that I picked out from years before. I like hunting deer that I know where they're bedded, and I'm usually try to set up on the downwind side of them and try to call them in. I do that through most of the whole entire season. A lot of places I hunt get a real lot of hunting pressure because I hunt southern New Hampshire and any place along the East Coast where within 20 miles where we are now. And as the season gets deeper towards the rut, I do a lot more aggressive calling. I do a lot of horn rattling. I hunt with Keith Regan, it's my hunting partner, and we set up a lot of times. We try to set each other up where the first guy that horn rattles in the morning is usually the guy that's upwind of the other guy. So as the deer circle around downwind to smell the deer that are actually fighting, one of us is usually there. I don't know how many times we've been successful doing that, but it's quite a few times. And even like I shot a 175-pound 8-pointer this year. Me and Keith were having a hard time finding deer to shoot in Massachusetts, and I think we had both shot in 3 in New Hampshire already. And the last day of the season in Massachusetts last year, I had jumped a buck out of a swamp, and I like finding deer that I find early in the season with horns and late in the season with horns from their beds. That means there's a good chance they spend a lot of time there. Come November 4th to the 24th, they could be any place, and there's a lot more luck involved in my eyes with those dates, even though that's when most of them are actually killed. And me and Keith set up on that deer this year, and he hunted one end of the swamp, and I hunted the other end closer to the power line, and we both tried to call it in. It ended up coming into me, and it crossed my scent trail and walked right down the trail to me, and as it turned broadside, I shot it. Late season, we're basically doing the same thing, but by then the deer have been pushed around so much, it's so hard to get them to move during the daylight hours. It's really hard to get one. I call Keith the late season king because he always seems to find a huge racked buck late season. And even though this year he shot a beautiful 10-pointer, I think it was the last 3 days of the New Hampshire season, We both set up on it, and it was in the snow, and we were both going on both sides of this thicket, and he just got up his tree. I was just getting ready to call him because I could see a huge set of tracks where I walked on the other side of it that went in there, and as I picked up my phone, it started to vibrate, and he tells me I just shot a rack buck. It was a beautiful 10-pointer. And last year he killed a 9-pointer, I think the third last day of the season too. But and then we came into Mass, and he was hunting a place we had, and he had a huge racked buck come by him, but he couldn't shoot it because he had already shot 2 bucks in Mass, and he set me up on the last day to try to call that deer in and kill it, but I didn't see it. But you know, you have a really good friend when they set you up on a huge racked buck and put you in the same tree that he's seen it from, and we've both done that a few times.
All right, very good. Neil, let's talk about your strategies and techniques, and talk about some of the same thing, your early season setup, mid-season setup, and late season.
For me, I really haven't figured out the early season. The earliest I've shot like a good mature buck was on October 18th, and that was the one that Jay mentioned that I hunted for 1,490 days. So for me, I'm not really an expert of the early season. I'm still trying to figure it out, where they are in summer food sources and summer patterns. I can figure it out and hone in and get them on trail cameras, but for me, it's more mid and late season. That's really when I've had most success because it's figuring out those annual patterns of what deer do year to year using trail cameras is probably my biggest success. So looking at that data and trying to identify certain patterns, whether it's wind direction, whether it's because of a food source or when does go into heat, and just really trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And then any good laid plans really don't always come together. But I feel like because of the hunting pressure, like some of the other hunters, especially Jim was talking about, that hunting pressure then can allow those deer to go back to their safe zones. So then it becomes late season. If I stay out of there and kind of wait, then I'm able to slip into those spots, and that's where those bigger bucks will feel safe and comfortable, especially we're talking older bucks, so they've established their home ranges in the spots that they go. So that's where, for me, it's more mid and late season. Some of it, too, is using mock scrapes. Like as Dean was saying, for me, mock scrapes has been a big success, not only to first find the bucks to get them on trail camera, but then hunting around them, because in the time that the rut's going to start and pre-rut, they're coming to check those, they're coming to mark their territory, and so that's when those bucks will start showing up in the area. So for me, pretty much tactics or trail cameras is my biggest asset. I run probably around 30 trail cameras now, so it's almost a full-time job checking trail cameras, and I don't want to start hunting areas unless I know that, one, there's a buck there, and then two, I've kind of had a little bit of an idea what he's doing. I always go out in the woods and hunt, but I may be hunting burner stands that I really don't feel I'm going to even have a shot of seeing the target buck that I'm after, because I still want to be out in the woods, but I'll try to wait until those right times. And that's something that, for me, through hunting through persistence, it's taken a while to stay out of those spots because there's one in there, you want to get in there and get after them. But it really is, just trying to, stay out of there and wait and be patient. So pretty much for me, that's, the main things is whether it's bow hunting or hunting with a gun, identifying first trail cameras, mock scrapes, and food sources. And then, of course, the occasional hot doe doesn't hurt.
That's just a good point. Todd, you hunt the Adirondacks, and that's a lot of space. There's a whole lot of acres out there. Where do you even begin early season? I can kind of envision maybe mid-season, late season. Where do you even start?
It's a little bit different for me because when people talk about like early season, most people don't realize, but I'm 48 years old, and if you look back on your hunting career, you say, well, where do I start during early season? I've only had, maybe 35 early seasons. So you only basically have 35 experiences to pull from. So in those seasons, I didn't really start killing big bucks until I was in my mid-20s to, say, 30. And what I realized in that time period is in the early season, I'll put on as many miles as I can. And in those hikes, I'll look for either where the deer have been feeding. You'll find like turned over leaves, a lot of nip buds. In the areas that I hunt, there's just not a lot of feed. So they feed on buds and stuff like that, and they nip away at it. If I find a place where there's a lot of sign in there, then what I'll do is I'll look for rubs, and it'll be like clusters of rubs. And if I find like a lot of clusters of rubs, it usually means that deer is living there because they don't travel that far at that time period of the year. So if they're living there and they're feeding there, I also have their buck sign there that I'm usually pretty sure if I get there on the right day, if the weather's right, then I think I can probably figure them out. And just an example of that this year, this past hunting season, I took a day, it was pouring rain, I knew nobody else was in the woods, and I covered about 6 miles in that day. And all I did was I tried to find where a deer was working, where he started to work. And I found a place like what I just told you, and he had a couple scrapes there, but they weren't real, they weren't real big scrapes, but I knew from my past that there had been primary scrapes there. So then I waited a couple days, and I went back in there. The wind was right. It was kind of blowing the direction I needed it to blow for that particular spot. And it was in a bunch of boulders, so I figured, well, if he comes in here, he's going to come in from the bottom out of those boulders, and he'll come check this scrape right before dark. And I sat down. It was about an hour before dark. I looked over my shoulder, and sure enough, he came right up between the 2 boulders. So, I mean, at the same time, I had a little bit of a funnel area there, and hunting there long enough, I knew where that deer was going to come from. And I had a past history of him because I had some pictures of him, and he did exactly what I thought he was going to do. Unfortunately, a lot of times they don't do what we think they're going to do, and we have to get really lucky, and a lot of people don't admit they're lucky when they hunt. And you make your own luck when you hunt, but you definitely need to get lucky. And that's kind of what I do in the early season.
Okay. How about the mid and late season? How does that change?
Every day I go out is different. So it's not like, I hunt differently whether it's one day to the next. But I've been the most successful in the mid-season. And, of course, that's because that's when the rut is usually full bore. And when you're hunting areas where there aren't a lot of deer, you basically have to find where does are. And if you can find the does and does are feeding in that area, I'll sit there whether there's buck sign or no buck sign, because I know that there aren't enough does in there. So any bucks that are in the area, they're going to go to where the does are. Just for an example, like last season, I only saw 5 deer. And of those 5 deer, they're all in one area. So I know that if they're staying in that area, then I'm going to be successful. Unfortunately, this year, my season ended early, so I really couldn't do a lot in that mid-season type range. But my biggest advice to you would be find where the does are. And then as I move back into the late season, I try to go to areas where I know big bucks are living. And as the season progresses where I hunt, you'll see a lot of signpost rubs that get re-rubbed from past years, and a lot of other rubs will start showing up. If I find big rubs in an area and they're showing up near the end of the season, that's where I'll return in hopes that I might catch up with that deer. Because in the Adirondacks, deer won't travel as much at that time period as what they did, say, 2 weeks prior when they were full bore rut. They'll kind of go back to the areas that they have all their sign where they live, and you have a lot better chance of catching up with them then than you do, say, like mid-November.
Excellent. So, Bobby, so you grew up in northern Vermont, and it looks like from the panelists here, you hunt more states than pretty much everybody else. What would you say some of the key strategies are that you have developed both in Vermont and in the other states where you hunt? And do you work your way from state to state based off of the seasons?
The way I hunt depends on where I hunt. I start early in New Hampshire because of the seasons. I love that time of year. A lot of guys struggle. I try to find one buck and hunt it. And it's food, it's where they bed. They don't usually go far. They don't always move during daylight, which is tough, but it's a lot of sits to get in. And then I just go, the reason I hunt so many states is pretty much the success rate during the time. Start in New Hampshire. I don't hunt a lot in Vermont anymore because the percentage of killing a good buck or the chance is not really there where it is compared to other states. So I hunt early season New Hampshire until usually gun season, and the first week or so is good for me until the deer start getting pushed around, and then trying to hunt pressured deer that do the same thing they don't, like everybody said, and that's usually when I head to the Midwest. There's pressure there, but there's a lot more deer, and you can hunt big deer the way that you should be able to hunt them. There's plenty there to hunt. You can get into pinch points, the signs there. The stuff you see is crazy compared to anywhere else. And then I usually come back and try to finish up New Hampshire rifle, maybe sit in Vermont just to see the woods because it's closer to where I live. Usually by then, if I still have a buck tag, which I usually get rid of it in the beginning of the New Hampshire if I'm lucky, I'll go to Maine. If I'm still in New Hampshire, I'll hunt it the same way, hunt snow, jump a track and see what they're doing. I mean, a lot of guys, they don't learn from deer, but that's what you got to do. They show you where they bed, they show you where they want to go toward the later part of November, and you can learn a lot. And then it's New Hampshire with a bow the last 2 weeks of December, which is one of the best times, in my opinion, to kill a deer if you can find some food. I mean, it's great. I passed $5 the last 2 days this year. Not quite the ones I wanted, but if you can find a hot food source, it's great. And then Massachusetts with a muzzleloader has got its opportunities, as Neil showed us this year. You can get into the food, and sometimes you get track and snow, and it's kind of the perfect storm. You just hunt the seasons as you can. I try to spend as much time as I can in the woods, and even during the winter when the snow's deep, I kind of give the deer a break and I kill some coyotes, and then as soon as the snow leaves, we're back to scouting again.
Excellent. Very good. Well, let's start with you, Bobby, on the next question. Any questions from the audience so far? The question from the audience is, how do you start a mock scrape?
Well, with the mock scrapes, I mean, it's one that, I mean, I think you can start them year-round. It's one of the things, obviously, it'll work well. I mean, I think for me, beginning, to middle of October, depending on when you're starting to see more buck movement on existing scrapes. Using trail cameras, I've seen a lot of that. I mean, it really depends on, one, the location, but then they'll hit them year-round. I mean, I have, spots where I leave cameras, year-round. Mostly it'll be does, not a lot of the bucks. But then starting, probably middle of September to late September, they'll start hitting the mock scrapes. To start them, fresh dirt. Deer love that smell of fresh dirt. They'll come in just to check out that fresh dirt smell, whether you've used, any scents, whether you've peed them yourself. I mean, that's a lot of times. I know when I was on Jay's podcast, I talked about Pendleton pee because I'll just, go ahead and urinate in it. It's great before you hop in your stand. You can relieve yourself. So I do that, whether it's using pre-orbital to put on the licking branch, whether it's buck urine or doe urine, that helps. But I think another thing, too, is you have to be careful of human scent around the scrapes as well. Because especially if you're trying to target mature bucks, if they know that there's a human in the area, they're going to be leery when they come to that. As Dean was saying earlier, they may not come to it. They could be downwind of it. They could be 70 yards away, especially if they know that the human's there. But any time's really good to start them. But what I've found is that if you start one, they may not be really active that season, but the following year, because they know it's there, those big bucks are going to come back to it and hit it. So that's where, leaving those cameras there, I may not even hunt it for 2 years. I mean, I have one spot in particular where it's been now since, I think, 2010 is when I started a mock scrape there, and every year it's just gotten better and better. More and more deer come because it's that signpost in that area. So...
And I want to add to that. I mean, he's absolutely right. This year, the 4th of July, we were up on a ridge, beautiful day, and we found a scrape line. These deer communicate. This is how they communicate. The licking branch is absolutely critical. If you go out and do your scouting in March after the snow melts, everything froze in time at one point. And when you go out there, those scrapes look as fresh as when they were made. The hookings, the shavings are still on the ground. This gives you a huge clue, and you can set up on these scrapes in the spring. Like I said, even if you don't hunt it right away, I've even opened up scrapes and prepared it for the upcoming season, so that if you set that up and you're all set, you clear your lanes, everything is done, your homework's done. When you hunt that buck September 15th, the biggest advantage is he has no idea he's being hunted. So that's a huge, thing in your back pocket. But you can start those scrapes, and primarily, if you could use buck urine, that's going to be your benefit. Because if you've got Mike, Bob, and Phil, a spike, a fork, and an 8, all living on that 50 acres or 100 acres, whatever you have, as soon as you put buck urine in that scrape, every other buck is going to hit that scrape, and you can get your inventory of buck to kill right there.
Okay.
when I do it, I just what we do is we just kick the dirt out, and sometimes I'll do it in an area where I think there might be a big buck there. So I'll kick the dirt out. I'll make sure I have a licking branch there that you can, either snap off or, something that they have to go there for. And then one thing that I've done, every time I've ever done it, a deer has showed up that night. And it's most likely because of the fresh dirt. And then if a big deer gets in there, then more and more deer will use it. We made one last year, Brian and I, who is sitting in the back there. He made it, and we had no idea what to expect. And we got 2 really big bucks for the Adirondacks in there. And they were both in there in the same time frame, and we killed one of them about a mile to a mile and a half from there the next morning. And we'll give a little shameless plug here, but the best thing I've ever used in a mock scrape after making it is Dean's buck urine. And I've never seen anything that really compared to it as far as when I made a scrape myself.
I'll add to that
thanks.
too. I'll add to that too. Starting around the first or second week of October, every single time I go into a spot, I use a lot of scent on my shoes all the time when I go in. And I circle my tree almost every time before I climb it because I know the deer follow me all the time. And usually putting a mock scrape in a place with underneath a branch ensures I look at that spot, I'm going to climb that tree right there. I'll be right up there 30 feet in the tree, and I get a clear shot at that spot. So when this deer actually comes down on my scent trail, he'll start circling my tree, and a lot of times I hang a tassel land right on that same exact spot, and as the deer approaches that thing, that's when I usually shoot him. But last year I climbed 47 different trees, and I move around a real lot. And most of the time when I'm hunting, I know the deer that live there because I've passed on them before. Even though I don't use trail cameras, everything I do is something that I see. So most of the time when I look at a track, I'm looking for a huge track in the mud or the dirt. And that tells me, there's a good chance that's a 170-pound, maybe 200-pound deer, and I'll keep going to that spot consistently.
Yeah, and then one other thing that I wanted to add, too, about having the scrapes near a stand location is that gives an excuse for the deer to hang out in that area longer. So if you're hunting first thing in the morning, you get into that stand early, and you have that fresh dirt, that mock scrape somewhere in the area, they're going to stop, check it out, they're going to hang out there. So you have enough time for it to get light out. So it's just one of those excuses for deer to hang out more in the area, and you can also set them up. You can get a shot opportunity. I mean, if they're in the right spot, the right angle for your stand, you know that they're going to go there, or even check it downwind. That can play the odds to your advantage. And I haven't used, Dean scents yet, but good scents, quality scents make a big difference. You don't want to use cheap stuff. I mean, I had real good success, and I usually don't use like doe and heat lures. It's mostly just for mock scrapes, but this year I bought one from a company. It was fresh. I mean, they bottled it within a few days, shipped it out in like a little cooler pack. I mean, it came in the mail. So when you're getting it from a company, that does that type of stuff and takes that type of care, it's better quality, so it's going to help our odds.
To add to what some of those guys said, I run a lot of cameras. And everybody thinks scrapes are October, November. I start my cameras in June, July on scrapes, and I'll have the deer I want to kill on those scrapes then. I mean, it's patternable, and it's crazy how much they use them, really. People don't understand that I use my own pea. It seems to work great right up through. And I've got deer that will use the same scrape year-round. In the snow, they'll dig it out. It's for does to come in and check a lot of things, but during the rut. But I think it's communication between deer. It's not just about getting it on. So I don't think a lot of guys understand that don't run cameras year round that these deer are checking these year round, and it's all you got to do is open them up. Sometimes, like the guy said, it's just the fresh dirt. Our urine breaks down the same way as theirs does. That's probably why that's mostly it. Maybe it's the Dunkin' Donuts. I don't know, but. But they will check it. The licking branch is super important. If you can find one that's getting hammered, watch that year-round. You can learn when they come in and leave an area. I mean, they're during the rut, it's hard to pattern deer. I mean, they're getting pushed most places. They're just looking for does. They can be miles away. I've had deer shot 3 or 4 miles away. I had on camera, the day before. But that early season is when you can get a good inventory of bucks on scrapes with pea or anything. Probably you get in their area, you get close, and that's how you can find them.
It was an area near bedding. I actually got him coming back to his bedding area. He did, I don't know if many of you have heard of the J hook that they'll make. They'll come down Winnebet and they'll J hook around that mock scrape. And it was a spot, he hadn't actually been to this scrape area in 2 seasons. It was where I initially first found him and first got pictures of him. So he was there the first couple of years, and then he stayed away from that area for a couple of years. And it just so happened that normally him or another good buck would be in that area. It's usually the last week of October is when they'd show up, going into November and start working those scrapes. And he just happened to be ahead of schedule in 2015. That I'd gotten pictures of him. I think it was on like the 14th or 15th, and then again on like the 16th, 17th, there was a cold front coming in. So I just knew that was going to be a weekend that, if he was going to be out roaming a little bit later, the stars were lining up with that cold front coming in, that I could, catch him coming late back to the bedroom. So that's, where it was mock scrape near a bedroom.
Okay. So guys, every hunter has their own opinion of what a shooter buck is or a big buck is, right? Each person might have limitations as to how often they can be in the woods. Some people can hunt weekends. Some people hunt a lot. You guys hunt a lot. What is your opinion? We'll start with Bobby. What's your opinion of a shooter buck? And I understand that it changes from state to state. Maybe a 200-pounder in New Hampshire is a shootable buck, whereas or smaller. But a 200-inch deer in Ohio is how they measure it. Bobby, let's start with you. What's your opinion of a shooter buck?
Like you said, it depends on the area. This deer was New Hampshire this year. This deer was Ohio. Both of them are kind of borderline bottom on what I'm looking for. I've shot smaller deer. I'm going to probably continue to shoot smaller deer on accident. Gun season kills me every year. Especially when you're like tracking deer or just even walking out through the woods. You see a rat go by, it's hard to judge. But bow season's when I really concentrate. New Hampshire, I'm looking for a 3.5-year-old better buck. I would break my own requirements. That's why I set my own. But that's usually what I'm looking for there. Ohio, I don't want to put inches on it, but this is probably a 3.5-year-old deer in Ohio. It's probably 125 inches. Usually I'm looking for a little bigger. Out of a tree stand, I tend to pass deer this bigger, not knowing what they are, even though I'm a scorer. It's hard to judge, and I always seem to downsize them. But this one came running at us on the ground while we were checking cameras, and we shot it. That was kind of a unique situation. It was pretty cool. Other states are different. If you're looking for a deer like this in Vermont, you'll go hungry. It's not going to happen. It happens to some guys. Most times it's on accident. New Hampshire, there's plenty of 3.5-year-old deer. That's usually what I'm looking for. And then the second tag's usually for the deer that I'm after, number 1 or 2 on my list. And then, Maine, a good rack buck, I really don't care what it is. If it jumps up, it's 180 pounds, going to get shot. Massachusetts, I've tend to been picky over there, but a rack deer there. But I hunt a lot. I don't expect everybody else to do the same thing. It all depends. If everybody should set goals. Don't be afraid to break them. Things happen, but it's nice to aim for certain points.
Okay. Todd, what's your opinion of a shooter buck?
It's a little bit unique for me because I've traveled all over the country and I've hunted every state from New York to Colorado. So every place I go, it's a little bit different. And what I tell people when they ask me that question, I shoot deer that excite me. A deer that doesn't excite you, or, it might excite me. It could be, like if I'm in New York, it could be a 4-pointer. It might excite me. I don't put any, inches on the deer. I shot plenty of small deer, and too many people get wrapped up in, I need to shoot a big buck. I need to shoot a big buck. You gain experience through shooting deer, and eventually you get to the point where you want to shoot big bucks, so you start letting lesser bucks go. Just an example this year, I have a lot of videos of deer that I let go this year, and I look back at the video, and I'm like, wow, maybe I shouldn't have let that deer go. If you put inches on it, like I've let 140-inch deer go, and I hunt exclusively public land. I don't hunt anything but public land, and when you're letting deer like that go on public land, you have to be willing to eat your tag. And when I was younger, I never wanted to eat my tag. I would shoot. If I had an opportunity to shoot something, I would shoot it. And since I moved my standards up of what I wanted to shoot, I've been pretty fortunate. I think in all the years, I've only had 1 year that I didn't kill a deer. But in that time period, I could have killed probably 50-some deer that I passed on different parcels of public land. So when people tell you, oh, my minimum is this or it's that, my minimum is if it doesn't excite me, I'm not going to shoot it.
Okay. Thank you. Neil, what's your opinion of a shooter buck?
For me, it's situational. It really depends on, one, the state I'm hunting, what my goals are, and then from running trail cameras, what I know is in the area. If I'm after 1 or 2 target bucks, and I know there's some other really good bucks, but they're not the top bucks in the area, I'm going to try to go and pass them. Some of it depends on then the state you're hunting, how many tags you have in your pocket, what time of season it is, and then as Todd was saying, over the years it's changed for me. I mean, when I started out, just wanted to go and get a deer, just wanted to go and get a buck. So I know a lot of people, that when they started into hunting, it's like you just need to, gain experience, as Todd was saying. So that's something that I really believe in, as Bobby said, setting goals. It's like you have that goal in mind. I know from talking to a lot of buddies personally, they say, look, I want to shoot big bucks, I want to get a good one. Well, if that's what you want to do, you got to set your mind to it and really stick to that goal and make that a big priority. And it may mean going a season, it may mean going 2 seasons, or the majority of that season without getting one. So for me, right now with where I'm at, it depends on the state that I'm hunting in. I mean, this year for me in New Hampshire, I didn't fill a tag because there was 2 deer that were on my hit list and one that I pretty much exclusively hunted and didn't have the opportunity at him. In Maine this year, it was for me something that I always wanted to get one over 200 pounds in Maine. So that was my goal, and that's what I was trying to stick with, and I was able to achieve it. Down in Ohio, I'd gone down the year before, and of course, going to Ohio, I wanted to shoot a giant. I mean, that was my goal. Didn't happen. This year I had said, well, I was going to lower my standards, and just wanted to get, a really good racked buck to complete the mission. So for me, the shooter is really whatever you have your sight set on, and just try to stick to that goal and then enjoy the experience. And, if it excites you, as Todd said, that's really at the end of the day. When you can go home and be happy about it, that's why we do what we do.
Excellent. Jim, how about you? What's your opinion of a shooter buck?
Well, for me, a shooter buck is... last 10 years, I've basically just hunted Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and I get 2 buck tags. And I like to do a lot of stuff with tassel glands. So usually the first deer I see that has horns, once it hits October, I usually shoot that deer, put some meat in my freezer, both states, usually Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Every now and then I get lucky and I shoot, an 8 or 10 pointer for my first deer of the season, but usually I want 2 fresh tassel glands to hunt the deer that I really know that I want to kill. So I'll shoot a buck in an area where I know and I don't know of any huge ones there. I'll shoot that one to put meat in my freezer, give me 2 tassel glands. And then depending on which buck I'm usually hunting, this year I was hunting 2 deer that I know were over 200 pounds, and I'll take just those particular tassel glands each time into that spot to leave a scent trail from that particular deer. So every time that deer comes out and crosses my trail, he smells another deer that came from a different area. And that tassel gland is usually from a smaller deer, because usually that's what I'll shoot first in the beginning of the season. And most of the time I go through the rest of the season and don't shoot a huge rack buck. The last 4 years, I shot 1 8-pointer or 1 9-pointer, and then spent the rest of the season trying to shoot a target buck. And this year I have one I call the Lone Wolf buck. I've seen him 13 times in 4 years from the same 5 trees that are basically about 30 yards apart. But the animal comes down to the corner of this swamp, and I sit high in trees. I'm 30, 35 feet to the bottom of my tree stand sometimes. Nothing ever smells me. And this deer comes on the downwind side of the swamp. He walks 60 yards to the right, depending on which way the wind is blowing, turns around and comes back and comes out the corner of the swamp. If the wind is blowing to the east, he walks 60 yards on the side of this swamp, walks back and comes down to the corner of the swamp. I've been telling Keith about this every time I see this deer, and he comes to the edge of the swamp and stands there till dark. And I call him the lone wolf buck. I've been trying to kill him for 4 years now, and I've got him in my video camera 6 times inside of 25 yards. I've drawn back on him 11 times and shot at him twice. Both shots are shots I would normally never, ever take, but I'm trying a little bit desperate to kill this deer. And every time I walk in there, I walk by guys with shotguns, and I carry a bow and arrow or muzzleloaders. And I see this deer, and both times I've shot at him, if you guys know anything about deer jumping the string, a deer that jumps the strings, he lowers his legs to run. Well, a deer that's walking directly away from you, he may jump the string and run away, which means you're going to kill that deer. But if he jumps the string and goes to the left, you're going to shave hair on the right side of him. If he jumps the string and goes to the right, you're going to shave hair on the left side of him. And that's what's happened with that deer for me. And I went to the end of the season this year, I think after the shotgun season ended in New Hampshire. This is a New Hampshire deer I'm hunting, and the first snowfall, I couldn't wait to go out and not to hunt the deer, just to see if any of the shotgun hunters had killed it, because I know this deer has a real lot of hunting pressure, and all I wanted to do is, it snowed all one day, which I'm sure he was bedded. I know where his bed is. I followed him back in this 2 years ago to his bedding area, and I see massive rubs all around his bedding area. He lives 250 yards out into a swamp. It's 1,700 paces for me to get to this particular spot from my car. And that deer is just one that seems so hard for me to kill, but I've seen him more than any rack buck I've ever seen. Keep in mind, I don't use trail cameras, so unless I see it or see a huge track in the mud, I don't know it's there. And this particular buck, he's just so smart, and he just will not step out of the edge of that swamp. I've got him on video 6 times, and I still haven't killed him yet. And that's what happens to me usually for every year. I end up chasing something that's really big, and they're really hard to kill. But I usually get 1 8-pointer every year. Up until 4 years ago, when I started hunting the lone wolf buck, I could shoot two 8-pointers every year, and that's a shoot a deer for me, something that has 8 points or more, you know. And this year I seen 24 deer. I got 22 out of those 24 to come inside of 25 yards of my tree stand, and 8 of them were 8-pointers or better. So, but the reason I didn't shoot some of the other ones is because I want to shoot this one particular one. And I went to the end of the season again. I shot 5 deer, filled my freezer, but I didn't get the one that I'm targeting after. And that one day that it snowed, the first time of the year, I went to look for both those tracks, because I know where both those deer beds. They live about 6 miles apart. And I found them both where they came out that evening, so I know they both made it through the shotgun season, and that makes it a little bit more exciting for next year, you know.
I can appreciate that, for sure. Rodney, what's your definition of a shooter buck?
I'm right on target with all these other guys, and I've probably never met a bad deer. Every deer I ever saw was a beautiful thing. However, after you've shot a few and you've got that under your belt a little bit, you start developing those goals that everybody's talking about, and there's a lot of specific things. Myself, I want to meet a lot of bucks. I want to meet them, and I'll have the feeling for the one that I want. I'm also a lot like Jim. I want to develop a relationship with that deer, right? Most fulfillment that you get out of life is in what you become, right? It's in the arrival. The destination is in the arrival. I don't want to suffer from more disease. I need to kill more and more and bigger in order to feel happy about what we shoot and what we do. I want all my emotions when I'm hunting to be self-actuated. I can feel good about anything I want to feel good because I'm in control of that. That's something that is very important, and I want to develop myself in that way. That being said, and us bringing, my wife and I are both, hunter ed instructors, so we bring a lot of new people into hunting, whether they're young or old or whatever, and they are all looking up to, especially all of us, for coming up with what we should do next, right? And when I'm out in the woods, and I am so fortunate, being a taxidermist, that's the busy time of year. You're right out straight during deer season, right? And I'm fortunate enough to have my wife, Teresa, taking care of the shop while the boys and I are in the woods. And I'm fortunate enough to get to hunt for 6 weeks, sometimes straight, every single day. And the other thing that I might want to put in perspective before it comes time to draw which deer you're looking for is that the places we hunt in New England, some of the spots we hunt, there's 4 deer per square mile, maybe. It's not unusual to walk 6 miles on the GPS, and some days never even see a track, okay? That makes for some awesome hunting and really bad killing.
Right.
That being said, when you go out in the woods for a week and a half and never see a deer or only see a couple of tails, that is really something that's hard on you. And all of a sudden those goals you set, they've just changed. They've changed a lot because I'd like to have something for all the effort that we put into it. When you start going out in some of the best states in the whole U.S., where you have the most land and the nicest areas to go out into, but the hunting is awesome, the killing is terrible. So that makes us all really good hunters because we've got to be adaptable. We've got to be changeable. And also, too, the few deer we have, they're pursued something wicked. They've got their head down, and boy, they ain't curious. They ain't going to hang out. And developing that relationship with a buck and meeting them is something I want to do. And when I've got 5 weeks straight to hunt in 3 different states, and they're all fairly close to each other, and I've got plenty of time, there's lots of open space, and I can take my time looking at deer. I'm looking for something that could weigh 200 pounds or more, and I'm looking for my biggest deer I've ever shot. I don't know about you guys, but I want to kill the biggest one I've ever gotten. That's always in the back of my goals. So when I look down and I see that giant track that looks like it's comparable to the biggest thing I've ever shot, well, there's the new goal for the day right there. Now, I may end up going a ways, and then something happens, and I can't meet the deer, or he never stops. So you track him all day long through, a couple 3,000-foot mountains, and that buck and I never meet up. But I start to learn his circle and where he's like, and I'm looking for that nice, big, heavy deer. Come down to the end of the season, and being hunting 3 different states, I try and pick and choose locations and weather and timing that'll be conducive to me getting a big one or getting something meeting a deer that I really love. And I'm looking for something that could weigh 200 pounds. If it's got a nice big rack, that's a bonus. If it doesn't, if it's just a young deer, I've met a few young deer, and boy, by the end of the day, I'm like, I gotta kill that thing. He is pulled a lot of tricks on me that a young one shouldn't have pulled, and by the end of the day, it's like I've suddenly changed gears, and this is the deer I want. I try and feel them all out and look for the one I want. Most of them, I haven't been using gadgets. I don't know what he looks like. I'm looking at the track and trying to decide if this is something I'm looking for, and I'll know it when I meet him. And there's been quite a few times I've had him, and I just put the gun down, nice and careful, and say, no, not today, and away I go. It leaves all options open. When I was little, my mother would read a story to me, and we had to turn one page at a time. I didn't look ahead to the pictures, right? I wanted to have it slowly unveil itself to me. And that's the way I always wanted the story to go down. So I try and keep my emotions the way I want them, and I make it happen the way I'd like it to. And boy, it has. Over the years, I've had some really fantastic experiences. Now we're carrying the cameras, and we can show it to everybody, and that's been a joy too. And I've seen so many things and had so many more opportunities when I opened up my limitations, and that's been a big thing. But I'm looking for a 200-pounder. If I could shoot a 200-pounder every year in Maine, you're doing something. Maine is where the men hunt. I've always said that, and that's the way it is. And if you can go out in a giant wilderness and handle yourself and do well at it, you've really accomplished something. And I'm looking for my best possible experience, and I don't know when that's going to come along. And same thing with people. You meet somebody, they might turn into the most awesome person you ever met. You never know. So I don't turn anything down.
Gotcha. Do you think we'll ever see Michael Waddell hunt Maine?
It's certain it would be something to see anyone, and that's the other thing. Most of us are hunting fairly open land. I mean, public land where anyone could go and get them. Those are wild deer, right? They've got their head down. That is something. When you walk into a place that's hunted real hard and you pull the biggest buck out of there, right? The most heavily hunted, the boys and I, we hunt places that get pounded by lots of guys and still kill big bucks in those places. You've done something. He's the wisest, most awesome deer you could get, and you gave him the best possible chance. That is the real goal for me. And my satisfaction, that's where I draw the line for me. And the beauty of hunting is everybody can do that for themselves. Everybody can decide. And I try not to limit anything, but keep the possibilities open, because the possibilities are in what we don't know.
Right. Yeah, I did actually ask Michael Waddell why he never comes to Maine to hunt, and he said it's too hard. Swear to God. It's on the podcast. Listen to it. He actually said that. Dean, what's a big buck to you?
Well, these guys are all great hunters, and these guys have all probably shot bigger buck than I have. I've been very blessed to shoot some really nice deer. I'm a little bit different in that respect. I like venison cannellonis, venison lasagnas, that kind of stuff. I don't buy meat in the store. Having said that, I haven't filled all my tags in most cases because I don't want to. I will have my target buck, a buck I've been hunting for 4 or 5 years, big old giants. On the other hand, one of my best bucks I've ever shot was I was on this ridge getting ready to walk in the woods, and this mom and this little girl are walking up, and this little girl is probably about 7. She goes, I'm all in camo with my bow, and she goes, where are you going? I says, well, I'm going up on that ridge to shoot a buck. It was Thanksgiving. And she goes, really? And I said, yeah. And she goes, well, good luck, mister. So I hiked up about 2 miles up on this oak ridge, and my brother and I had this little thing going on. How fast can we put a deer in a scrape? Well, this particular time, it was about 18 minutes. I think that the deer actually heard me making the scrape, circle downwind, and come in. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is it all came together. This was a little 6-pointer, and he was with a bigger 8. And it just came together so well. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I could have waited for the 8, but the 6 offered me a beautiful shot. It was 2 o'clock. I knew I'd get great penetration, and the sun was shining, and it was gorgeous. I shot the little 6. I found him within probably 50 yards. I was off the mountain, well within daylight, and it was just a beautiful hunt. So it's not so much about the antlers. It's about choice. This year, I shot a nice buck. My wife shot a nice buck. That brings me more joy in 40 years of deer hunting to see that somebody else doing it as well. I passed up probably at least 10 other small bucks by choice. My freezer was full. I was still looking for that shooter buck, that big, 240 pounder. We've had some that dressed out 265. Very close to us. So we've had some really giant deer. And being blessed enough to use mock scrapes almost exclusively with cameras on them, we've got a pretty good inventory. And in most cases, I never see a hunter in the woods. It's big woods. New Hampshire's got some great property. I go out of my way to go in far enough so I'm not seeing people. It's very, very rare. I think I've seen maybe 2 hunters in 5 years, maybe less. So the areas I go to, it's all public land. There's no rhyme or reason where some of these bucks are going to be. There's very little oaks, or there's an oak ridge here or there, but it's so spotty they're almost impossible to pattern. But I think the gift is in the eyes of the beholder. And when you look at that life, when you pull that trigger, a spike horn is the same life as a 10-pointer. Yeah, they go up on the wall, and I've shot some beautiful buck. They bring you great joy, tremendous pride, and it makes you a better hunter. And I think that's what everybody here really strives for. But I've gotten out of that tag out stage. Oh, I've got to fill my tag, as opposed to, okay, I've got enough meat. That's a beautiful deer. I've shared this experience. You'll remember it forever. One thing about every single damn deer you kill, you remember every darn thing about that experience. There's not a minute that you don't remember about what happened. That's why some of these guys tell some of the best stories you'll ever hear. So, but that's my opinion of a trophy buck.
Gotcha. Any questions from the audience about the opinion of a trophy buck? Let's move on to the next subject. Dean, start with Dean. Dean, you said that the future of hunting depends upon the youth of today, right? We know that deer numbers are probably at an all-time high from our lifetime, and that we have seen a decline in hunters over the last few years. Why is it important to bring the youth into this picture, and how do you do it?
Well, ironically, I grew up in northern Vermont as well, about 10 miles off the Canadian border, and I was like 7 years old, and nobody really taught me to hunt. They used to shut Ethan Allen down, the mills down. There were trucks parked on both sides of the roads. The guys were wearing green plaid jackets and red plaid jackets, and I'd yank on every one of these jackets saying, teach me. You know, I'd get my hat knocked off. But I was pretty persistent. I figured out most of the stories that these guys were telling were lies anyway. But that took a little while. But the fact of the matter is when I saw that buck on the back of a truck, you know, there was so much pride. And that's why they used to parade a deer around town. It was shared. It was a story. It goes back thousands of years when an Indian would shoot a deer, tell me the story around the campfire. And so for me, it was that desire to learn. I had that twinkle in my eye. I read everything I possibly could. So nowadays, when I see a little kid, his hat's on straight, you know, his shirt's tucked in, and, you know, I give him my Deer and Deer Hunting magazine. And it gives a kid, when you teach someone to hunt or to fish, it gives them a gift that lasts a lifetime. And I think that's absolutely critical in today's environment, not to mention if the lights go out, you don't go hungry. But I lived it. I've developed what I consider some pretty good skills, and I think it's a good way to teach people the responsibilities of life, death, honesty, integrity. I mean, these are all lessons as deer hunters that we've learned, and I think it's a good thing to pass on to today's youth.
Rodney, you have a fantastic YouTube channel. You talk a lot about family hunting. How do you bring youth hunters into the mix, and why is it important?
Even as sportsmen, I would have to say that us upping our competence is very important, right? We have to move to the next stage. And when you look at hunting and you say, okay, what's next? It's important that all of us check our behaviors, that we have a conscious awareness of what we do. We have to be relatable to ourselves, and we're easily relatable to each other, right? We can talk about deer camp, and it comes right together.
Absolutely.
Sportsmen are really good about relating to each other. We also have to be able to relate to the folks in the public who choose not to hunt, and then those even in the public that are against us hunting. We have to be able to be relatable to everyone, and that's an important thing for hunting to survive. Another thing that really gives that a little bit of a challenge is that in Vermont, our last survey we had 4,600 hunter education students come through our program in Vermont. We also had a lot of outdoor getting started type programs where someone wants to get started turkey hunting, get started deer hunting, get started bear hunting, moose hunting, all those things. We teach a lot of those classes. And in teaching those classes, I see there's a big movement of people into the green meat, into the eating and the wise use of, conservation. That's what that word means, the wise use. And we don't want to necessarily think of nature as a resource. We want to think of it as the source, right? It is the source of life. That's how important it is. And I think a lot of the public would expect that from us. And that's where the bend and the trend should probably head for. Myself, I love it so much, and I was thinking, well, what's the best way to get people to love this, to get people to fall in love with that nature? And when I'm holding a hunter safety course and I ask everybody in the course, why is nature important? And no one holds their hand up. And I say, well, because we can't live without it. Those are very, very important things. And in order for hunting to do well, and especially with our average hunter age now being 53, it's moved up a lot. kids have a hard time relating to somebody who's 53, right? And in general, our hunting population is made up of older fellas as we go. And the boys and I were thinking about it, how can we get to hunting to be more relatable? How can we, even as a Fish and Wildlife Department, Vermont has gone out of its way to try and be relatable to all the people who own the wildlife of America. That's an important thing. Getting all these things and being able to say these things to everyone in your life and getting them to care about what you do, or at least allow you to do what you do, those are important things. And myself, I was striving, how do I go about doing the most good for hunting, because I love it so much. And being that instructor has done a lot. That has really changed me. Being a taxidermist and mounting the mount, and when that young girl shoots her first deer and she brings it home and hangs it on the wall, she may not kill a lot of deer in her lifetime, but it's okay for her to go hunting, and she's had an experience. And life is about experiences. And those young people, when they learn about themselves, that's where that real fulfillment comes. And everyone can relate to that nice feeling. And when we're the boys and I are out in the woods and we're joking and laughing and having a good time and having a good experience, that's something we created. We created that experience. And when we're filming and sharing it with other people, we hope that they'll relate to that. On the channel, I think Taylor was saying yesterday, our most viewers are from 23 to 35. Most hunting clubs and hunting organizations are generally made up of older guys. And same thing, they've got to be relatable to a new people. And times have changed. The world is more crowded. People really care about wildlife. They care about life. And the not wasting or the shooting for fun, right? That's not cool with a lot of people. So we've got to kind of up our confidence a little bit and do our best to bring those about for everyone. And that is a more relatable thing always.
Gotcha. Thank you. Jim, how do we bring the youth to hunt?
Well, that's a good one for me because I don't know. But I do know that, 14, 15 years ago, I used to shoot my bow in the yard every single day. And the kids would come home from school. Everybody in the neighborhood knew who I was. And there'd be a line of probably 10 or 12 kids all in line ready to shoot one arrow apiece so they could shoot next to me. But if I let them all shoot 5 arrows apiece, I would have been there forever. And they'd all be lined up to shoot their bow with me, usually my son's bow or something like that, or my daughter's bows, and they'd all shoot one arrow. I'd shoot 5, and then it'd be a closer target for them to shoot at, and they'd all shoot. And this went on for, I don't know how many years, quite a few. I mean, it even got to the point where there was one kid that used to sit on my front steps every day waiting for me to come home from work, and his mother actually came to my house and says, is my son bothering you? I said, no, he can come shoot in my yard anytime he wants. I shoot the bow every day, and this kid came every day. And Thanksgiving morning, I used to take, my work van is a 16-passenger bus with all the seats taken out of it, and those are the vans I've been using for the last few years. I used to take all the kids in the neighborhood to do deer drives just so they could see one. So there'd be probably 15 or 16 of us packed into this bus. Everybody had bow and arrows, and we'd go drive these pieces of woods. And in the 10 or 12 years that we did it, we only shot one deer. One of the guys got lucky and shot a deer with the bow and arrow, but I remember it very well, and it was really fun. All these kids, my next door neighbors came by one time, and they forecasted torrential rain for the next day. And they came over and said, Jim, I know it's supposed to rain tomorrow, but we take showers every day, and the water doesn't bother us. And I can remember them saying that, and the next day, all the kids in the neighborhood showed up. I'd show me a couple of my older buddies, and we'd go do drives all around the neighborhood where we lived in different pieces of woods. And just getting those kids interested in it, although none of them actually really hunt right now except 2 of them, I kind of thought a lot more of them would have got more interested into doing it. But that was the kid part of it for me. And since then, all my kids are between 20 and 26 years old now. And most of the kids in the neighborhood where I live have grown up. There was a couple new kids that come and shoot in the yard with me every now and then here, but it was nothing like it was, 15, 20 years ago.
Cool, thanks. Neil, how do we bring youth into the hunting realm?
Well, for me, I don't have necessarily a whole lot of experience with youth because I don't have any kids myself. Most all my friends, their kids aren't old enough to get into hunting or even really fishing yet. So I'm going to take a little different tactic on this one, Jay, and kind of talk about, just new hunters in general. Whether it's somebody new, like I look out in the crowd here, and I know Nick just got his wife, into hunting recently, and so she's absolutely fallen in love with it from seeing stuff, on Facebook and how much she's enjoying it. Whether it's someone like Michael who's, new to hunting and how much he's really started to enjoy it. And for me, I really think about, one of my experiences when I got a friend introduced to hunting. And for me, it was like taking a kid hunting. He didn't know anything about it. Everything was new. The world, was completely different to him. When I talk to clients at where I work, about hunting, I work down in Massachusetts, and so I run an all-women's gym, personal training. So a lot of them, they didn't grow up with a hunting culture around. So to educate them about hunting as well, they just love hearing about like the whole science that goes into it, why we do it. And so it's eye-opening. But to introduce a friend, whether it's somebody who's loved to hunting who doesn't have the opportunities anymore, whether it's somebody who's older or someone like Roscoe who takes veterans out to give them the opportunity. We love the outdoors, and I mean people love the outdoors in general, and so to have that opportunity to teach someone about the outdoors, to give them the experiences, any new hunter, someone's looking to get into it, to take the time to help them, to teach them, to give them success, to give them the opportunities, is really big for all of us because something we love so much, and we want to continue to have these opportunities. And unless there's more people interested in it, that's when the opportunities can go away. Back to the original question, as far as getting the youth into it, it's something that I love and look forward to. To spending time, with kids and teaching them about it. I just haven't had a ton of experience myself, so I'm sure all you guys, other guys, can answer the question a lot better than I can.
Very good, Todd. What's your opinion? How do we get youth involved in hunting?
I have a lot of opinions, and if I voiced all of them, we could probably be here all day. So I'll just touch briefly on a few. And I think it all starts with family. And I was brought up in a hunting family. My brother and I were both introduced to it when we were kids, and my brother was a diehard hunter. My first introduction to actually killing something, which is what hunting is if you're successful, you have to deal with life and death and learn how to deal with life and death. It wasn't good. My father shot a raccoon, and we were coon hunting at nighttime. And I ran home and I cried. I said, and I just didn't like hunting. So, and I told him I will never be a hunter because I can't kill something. And even to this day, when I kill something, it bothers me. And for us to get kids involved, we have to somehow teach them the difference between life and death, and that what we're doing is for the betterment of conservation. And I think you have to get involved in kids' programs. I'm involved in competitive archery, and I teach competitive archery to children. A lot of these children have no interest in hunting, and they just want to shoot archery. So that's a good opportunity for me to introduce hunting to them, because a lot of their parents don't want them hunting. They don't believe in hunting. It involves killing. And if you can gradually introduce it to them and tell them, like, I go into the woods a lot just to be alone, and I enjoy my alone time, and I feel really good out there. And every kid is different. Some kid might want to stay home, play a video game, and another kid might want to be in the outdoors. So you kind of have to pick children that have somewhat of a genuine interest in being outdoors. And I can relate this back to, I was probably in my early 20s, maybe mid-20s. And this woman called me on the phone, and she gave me her background, and she told me that her husband was a doctor, and neither her nor the husband had any interest in hunting. And they didn't know what to do because all their child wanted to do was be in the outdoors and experience hunting. And I told her that I would take him under my wing, and I'll be like, well, I'll teach him how to shoot archery, and we'll see how the hunting thing goes. So over the years, I started bringing him hunting, and he could never see a deer. And I'm like, oh, wow, this isn't good. We need to get this kid so he can see a deer. And too many people bring their kids to places where it's just not beneficial. If you want a kid involved, the kid has to see deer. You can't bring the kid to northern Maine and expect the kid to like it if he's tramping all through the woods, and at the end of the day, he's like, this just sucks. I'm not doing this. We walked 7 miles. You trudge my ass through the wet snow. It's just not worth it. So when I was a kid, I was lucky because my father brought me to southern New York. And what people say in New York, if you want to kill deer, go to southern New York. If you want to hunt deer, go to the Adirondack Mountains. So when I went to southern New York, I was involved in, I saw deer all the time. The first time I ever went there, I ran out of arrows. I shot all my arrows and, I'm probably dating myself, but we had to go to a James Way store so I could buy new arrows so I could continue to hunt. And when I experienced that stuff, I'm like, wow, this is awesome. And I was seeing things in the woods that I knew I would never see elsewhere. And having those experiences to draw from, I'm like, this would be really cool if I could introduce other kids to this and even adults. So when it was time for me to go to college, I had already been accepted at one college, and one of my really good friends told me where he was going to college. And I'm like, there's a college there? He's like, yeah, there's a college there. Well, this is the place where I lost all my arrows, and I never knew there was a college there. So I applied to the college. I ended up going there. And 90% of the students at the college are from New York City and Long Island. So I lived there with, I eventually moved into a house. There were 6 guys in the house and me. None of these guys had ever had an outdoor experience in their life. And I brought them with me hunting, even though they didn't have hunting licenses. And they sat with me, they experienced it, and they're like, wow, this is really cool. And of those 6 guys that lived in my house, 5 of them have hunting licenses today. And they were never introduced to hunting before that. And part of that is giving up yourself to show somebody else the way. Too many people are self-consumed with themselves and just, I want to do this, I want to do that, and they don't make time for other people. And if you don't make the time for other people, you're never going to get the people behind us to continue. And if the people behind us don't continue, then what we grew up doing is just, it's not going to exist anymore. And like another thing, like a lot of you guys, I'm sure you've shopped at Cabela's, and they always say when you check out, well, do you want the extra change to go to conservation? I always say, yes, put my money towards conservation, because that helps us, keep it alive, and it gives other people the opportunity that I've grown up to have. So that's kind of where I stand with all of that.
Very good. Thank you, Todd. Bobby, how about you? How do we bring more youth hunters into the mix? Or just hunters?
I think we're kind of fighting an uphill battle. The way that society has gone now is tough. People like Rodney, we should all look up to him. He's doing a good thing for the kids. My daughter's class, she's 10 years old. I don't think there's a kid that hunts in that class. She goes with me all the time. Like Todd, she's not a killer. We put a lot of animals in front of her, and she's just, that's when she shuts off. She's done. But I still bring her. She enjoys it. It's scary to look at the other kids. I think it just boils down to bringing them out, but unfortunately there's not a lot of kids that want to go. We need more people like Rodney, I think. It's bringing the kids that don't hunt and showing them that it's not about just killing, like Todd said. I don't know. It's tough. It's scary to look at the future, to be honest. There's too many people that don't hunt, and it's not good.
Gotcha. I do like what Rodney's doing, and if you want to pick up the mic.
One thing I've found, and it seems to be the case pretty much everywhere, is that it's easy to want to preserve your world to keep it the way it is, right? If someone chooses to not, it's not the end of the world, right? It really isn't. My sons, I have one that is, he ain't afraid to pull the trigger. He's actually in a hurry to pull the trigger. I have another one that's in the middle, and he takes his time and decides. And I have another one who's even different, and he's a little bit, I'm not so much. I'll do it, but I'm not so much. One thing that I tried to do with all of my sons was be sensitive as I raised them, be sensitive to what they wanted. It's very easy for us to impose ourselves on others, right? Teaching has to want, someone has to want to be taught. When I hold a hunter safety course, Everybody can't wait, right? They signed up for it. They chose it. They picked it. They're the best students in the world, right, when they get there, because they're so like, let's go. When you had to go to school, math, right? So you bet. And I try not to push anything on it. But I also try and get them to understand life feeds on life. Every one of us ate something that was alive today, right? I'm a pile of food. That's what I am. All things out there. The appreciation of the system that this world is, the miracles that are going on, that's the part I use. An ant is a miraculous thing. So is a coyote. So is a human being. And they're all created by nature. They're all important. And the system is what's important. We won't save this planet, right, until we can all get along and agree. Then we'll take the time to save it. Otherwise, we're going to need 4 more planets at the rate we're going. If all of us are compulsive, we can't do that, of course. But you bet, it's a lot of fun. And I've had to change my view a little bit. And if each one of us, 7 billion of us, change our view just a little bit, and we're more open to each other and what we're all looking for experiences in our lives, we'll be way better off, and so will the planet, right?
I have to say that, looking at the youth, I have a son, he's 10 years old. He loves fishing. That's why he's not in the room right now. He's over at the fishing tank. That's all he talked about when we went home last night. He wanted to go to the fishing tank. I've taken him hunting. He's shot a nice turkey before. He's shown some interest in deer hunting, but he kind of waffles back and forth. But fishing is where he wants. He wants the action. Just wants the action. But one thing I have noticed, and this blew me away one day. I was going to be a chaperone on one of my son's field trips. And this was 3 years or so, 4 years after we started the podcast. I had gone in to his classroom in preparation to load up on the cars and the buses. And 2 of his classmates came up to me and says, "You're Jay from the Big Buck Registry." And it blew me away. I walk in a room, and sometimes people might notice, but I walked into a classroom, and 2 of his fellow students knew exactly who I was. They watched our live shoots on Facebook. They are aware of how I say Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast. They repeat it to me. They make fun of me. So I know I'm at least hitting a nerve there. So I thought that was really interesting. And my son also, when we were saying hi to some of the panelists here, we went over to Rodney's booth, and my son didn't look at the deer on the wall. I mean, I'm sure he glanced at it, looked at Jim's wall. But he went right to the YouTube emblem above Rodney's television because he's so used to YouTube. He watches YouTube all the time. So I think we can reach out to youth by going to where they're hanging out, right? And still send a message out to get more into the mix. So just my 2 cents. Let's move on to our favorite hunts, guys. We've all been on a bunch of hunts. There are some that stick out more than others, and maybe there's too many to remember. Let's go through kind of a detailed version of one of our favorite hunts.
I've been featured on a lot of different podcasts, Jay's included. So anybody who listens to this will probably tell me I'm lying because, I mean, I use a different favorite hunt on every one of them. But I'll be honest, every time I'm in the woods, it's my favorite hunt because you never know if it might be your last hunt. And like I had a situation like that a few years back, and my father had a heart attack, and we didn't know if he'd ever be able to hunt in the mountains again, let alone ever hunt again. So, you know, it was odd because that season we didn't know what we could do, what we couldn't do, because being older, it's like we didn't want to be back in because we've always hunted way back in the mountains. And it was just like, what should we do? And so then finally, as the season progressed, it was my father was feeling more comfortable, and he started putting a lot of miles on. And most of you don't know my father, but he's in his early 70s. And just for an example, this year he killed an elk in Colorado, and he had put on 13 miles before he killed the elk. So it's pretty hard to keep him under wraps. So one night we were quite a ways back in the woods. It was afternoon, and I had just talked to him on the radio. And I looked on my GPS because we hunt with rhinos, and he was about a mile from where I was. And I'm already 2 miles from the road. and we got to get out at night too. So, and I said, well, what are you going to do? And he's like, well, I'm down on the edge of the swamp. I'm going to stay here for a little while. So I said, okay. I said, I'll meet you up in this area I'm in now, and then we'll head out. So I was crunching through the snow or something. I leave my radio on, and he's on the radio. He's like, well, how long are you going to be? I said, what do you mean? And he says, you didn't hear me shoot? I'm like, no, I never heard the shots. I said, how many times did you shoot? He said, I shot 3 times. I said, well, did you shoot something? He's like, yeah, I shot the antler right off this deer. And I'm like, well, where are you? And he's like, well, I'm in the same place. When I came through the swamp, there were some does in there, so I just knelt down. He says, and then when they came through, he says, about a half hour later, another a decent buck came through, and he says, and I shot it. He says, I don't know how we're going to get it out of here. I said, me neither. So I went down in there, and, we got to the deer. We took care of it. And if anybody's ever seen a picture of it, it's my father's wearing this, like, Russian mobster type hat on because it was so cold out. And we took care of the deer, and I knew, from talking to the doctor, I said, he can't drag the deer. And I'm like, well, what are we going to do now? And we backpacked him out. We boned him out. But we decided to drag the deer out. So, and we had to go across the swamp. So we went across the swamp, and I said to him, I'll drag till dark, and wherever we are at dark, we'll go back out, and we'll get my buddy Brian and Josh, and they can come back in and help us. So they came back in, and they helped us, and we got it out. I don't know, we got out like 10 o'clock that night. And like looking back on it, I think to myself, he did everything for me when I was growing up, and it was my time to finally give back. And even though he was 70, he still insists on dragging my deer out, doing whatever with my deer. And it just, in some ways, it was kind of sad because I was like, oh, wow. I said, I'm giving back finally, and although I'm like almost 50, I'm still his kid. And he still looks at me like I'm 12 years old. But that hunt was probably really memorable for me.
Excellent. Very good. Neil, how about you? Are you going to tell the story of the 1,490-day buck?
I love that story. For me, it's, a deer that means the world to me. Taught me a lot. Over 5 seasons, 1,490 days, 10-and-a-half-year-old buck. In an area that was heavily pressured. But I think that story would maybe take too long to tell.
Okay, that's a lot of days.
And then, of course, you can always listen to the podcast as well if you want to hear the story, because I've told that one before. So for me, I think I'm going to kind of follow up on what Todd was saying, because for me, hunting with my father is something that really means a lot. He got me into hunting, so to hunt with him, it's the best time of the year for me. To go up to deer camp, to spend time with him, just to tell the stories, to come back to camp, talk about how the day went, wake up in the morning, have that cup of coffee. To me, that's the best time every year. So this year, I ended up going up to the cabin, started hunting with my dad, and we had a really cool experience where he had been hunting up there all month. I had some trail cameras out. Had gotten some information from previous seasons where I thought there was going to be some good deer sign. And sometimes I'm secretive about telling my dad where my cameras are because he's up there the whole month ahead of me. So he can get a little jump start. So when I show up, he's already hunted all those spots. So I put some out and kind of kept it a secret. He came down to New Hampshire, and he hunted down here. And unfortunately, we had the bad ice storm that came through right at the beginning of November, as everyone knows. So he lost power, had to head home to make sure the house was okay. And before he took off, I said, hey, Dad, here's where a few of the cameras are. So when you get up to camp, you can go check the cameras and see if there's any good bucks in the area. So he'd gone up to camp. He hunted a few days and checked some of the cameras, and he actually saw one real nice buck at one of the spots at the end of a logging road. And there's one camera he hadn't checked yet. And I kept saying, Dad, you got to go check that camera. I really think it's going to be in a good spot. There's some good buck sign there. So we went down and checked it. And sure enough, first day he gets in there was 3 days in a row. There was a wide rack 10-pointer that, come to find out, weighed 200 pounds exactly on the nose. So, of course, 3 days in a row, between 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning it had been there. He set up a stand right where my camera was. He ended up on the 4th day not seeing that deer because it was snowing, but it might as well have been raining. He stuck it out there most of the day. Towards the end of the day, went back to camp, changed his clothes into dry stuff, came back, and he put out another camera before he got in the stand. Well, that camera he set up a few hundred yards away. He continued to hunt in that area and check it. he ended up seeing a real big buck. This one, I mean, was a beautiful rack on it. It was 11-pointer. The rack was blurry, so we couldn't tell exactly what it was, but we were definitely confident that one was over 200 pounds. So we started hunting that particular area. And this was a spot along the edge of the lake where a ridge dropped down off, and not only did the lake have a contour where it took a bend, but the ridge took a bend as well. So it was just a great transition area. Softwoods met hardwoods. There was a mix of oaks, some beech there. So it's a great area for deer to migrate around as well as feed. So in that area, he kept hunting for probably 4 or 5 days. Had jumped a couple of deer, but he was trying to stay out of it. Finally, I showed up to camp. I got up there the night before Thanksgiving, checked some other cameras, didn't really see what I wanted to, for big buck sign. I knew that he was in a good area, so I was hopeful he was going to get one any day now. I started scouting areas where the year before I'd had success. I was seeing deer, but still really wasn't seeing like the big buck that I was after. So finally on Saturday, I creeped over a little closer to where he was, because I said that seems like where everything's at. Went on top of the ridge, saw a bunch of scrapes. Probably 30, 40 scrapes in an area where I don't see that many scrapes in this part of Maine. So I knew it was a great area, but all the feed was down where he was. So we went back to camp that Sunday. Of course, can't hunt Sundays in Maine. We put a plan together. He was going to sit down closer to the lake in a spot where he'd seen a scrape and jumped a buck that Friday, I believe it was. So that morning we planned on going in early. I was going to sit on top of the ridge. He was going to sit down, where the beach, where all the beech nuts were. And so we both get in early. He came in from one side, I came in from the other side, and I'm sitting up on top of the ridge in a climbing tree stand. Finally, around 8 o'clock in the morning, I get that wake me up in my stand, jolt, because I hear the boom go off. So when the gun went off, I knew it was my dad. He was probably only 4/10 of a mile away. So I'm texting with him. I get the text back confirming that he ended up getting a buck down. Said it was, a good, what he thought, 7 or 8 pointer. Wasn't a huge buck for him, but it was the last week. So he was happy. I knew where he was. It looked like he was in a real good area. So I said, hey, can you leave your stand down there? I think I want to move down into that spot. So I humped down off the ridge, brought all my gear down, and I got to meet up with my dad, see his deer, give him congratulations. And then he was going to show me into where the stand was. So he brought me in, showed me where the climber was, and he said, I'm going to take off and go back to the cabin and grab a canoe to actually come by lake to go and get the buck out, because he didn't want to drag it through the woods knowing I was going to be hunting there. So he ended up grabbing the canoe, going back to camp. I sit in the stand. It's now probably 10 o'clock. Wind's just howling that day. I'm sitting facing with the wind in my back, so I can, still, just keep my eyes peeled all day long, glassing around. So I'm looking through the hardwoods ridge. Haven't seen a deer all day long. Finally, I hear him come back. I hear the paddle noise in the fiberglass canoe clinking around. He's paddling across the lake. He takes his deer out, goes back, loads it in the truck, goes out to the tagging station to tag it. And finally, the wind starts to die down. It's about now 2:45 in the afternoon. That's when then I look up, and all of a sudden, here comes a buck down off the ridge, probably about 125, 150 yards off. It goes down in behind this big boulder. I'm looking over at it, and I said, okay, this is a buck that I know I want to shoot. I think it's finally the one over 200 pounds in Maine that I want. It comes out around the rock. As soon as it comes out around it, I just see the tips of the horns coming out, and it's the one that he had on camera. So I had the muzzle loader. I know it's going to come right down towards me. It probably gets to about 60, 70 yards and just stops. Dead in its tracks, head goes down to the ground. And I'm like, what's going on? Why did it just stop? Well, I'm sitting in the same stand that my dad just shot one that morning. I don't know if he's smelling my dad. I don't know if he's smelling the buck. So when he stopped, put his head right down, there was one window that I had between all the branches in the hardwoods that I pull up the scope, have it in the crosshairs, and his head straight down. So I said, well, it's now time to shoot. I've taken the trigger off 3-4 times thinking he could get closer. I know it's, the buck that I want. So I end up finally touching off. Luckily, he goes right down, almost cartwheels over. So at that point, I was, pretty excited. Text a couple of buddies, but I ended up texting my dad first. It takes a while for him to respond because we don't have a lot of service up there, and I text him BBD. And I think many of you probably know what BBD means, but if you don't, big buck down. My dad says, huh? ? He clearly didn't know what BBD meant. So I said, big buck down. I got him. He sends a text back, expletive, yeah, congratulations. I said, do you still have the canoe in the back of the truck? So he responds back, yeah, I have the canoe. So I end up climbing down, walk out to the lake, walk down the lake, come out to the logging road that he had drove in on. He had just pulled up. So I see him sending me a text letting me know that he's here. So I'm seeing he's literally shifting the truck into park. And finally he looks up from his phone, sees me standing in the road, and arms go up in the air. He gets out of the truck. We come up, we embrace, celebrate. I said, Dad, I think I finally did it. I got one over 200 pounds. So we walk down the lake, launch the canoe, paddle across the lake, got the life jackets on, go over the buck, look at it, celebrate, congratulate, put it in the canoe, paddle back across the lake, go out to the tagging station. We get to the tagging station on the scales, digital scales, they hoist it up. And I got to finally see it, go over 200 pounds. I got to share that moment with my dad. Same stand, same day, same spot. I mean, I guess the part that I left out is when I went over to look at my buck, 5 yards in front of it, there was, a big pool of blood there from my dad had actually shot his, and that's why he'd stopped and put his head down on the ground. So to have that memory, with my dad this season, it's just one of those things that doesn't often happen, to get that opportunity and to share it with him, and to finally achieve, that for me was a real memorable hunt of finally getting one over 200 pounds.
Excellent. Outstanding. Bobby, you want to give us your best and favorite deer hunting story?
I wish I had a favorite. I remember them all. I guess the one that is probably freshest in my memory was the an 8-pointer I got last year, early season. I'd found a pinch where a logging road come through and the beavers had dammed it up. So if the deer wanted to go through without getting wet, they had to go through probably a 20-yard spot. Hung the cam there July. I didn't get even a buck on camera until a week before the season. Would have been September 1st, so 2 weeks before the season. And I finally got the deer on camera that I knew was in there. I thought he was a 10 because all the pictures I got was from him moving through the funnel quick. He ended up being an 8 with no brow tines. I hunted the spot 3 times. The first night I saw what I thought was him go through. I couldn't see the rack. So I gave the pinch another day. Didn't see anything. Went to the top of the hill where I thought I see the big deer go through, and it was an hour and a half later, and he comes through. It sounds like a quick story, but when they happen like that, it's pretty sweet, especially when you've got them on camera and everything worked the way you want. Got a bunch of other ones that are close to it, but they're all the same end of the story. But the journey is usually what you remember more than the kill. So
that is true. Sometimes it just comes together. Sometimes it does. Rodney, how about your best and favorite deer hunting story?
There was a buck that I try not to hunt anything I don't think is at least a 3-year-old. Even in Vermont, in the last 6 or 7 years now, I've shot pretty near a 3-year-old in Vermont every year. I think this was the first year I got a 2-year-old, but or better. But there was one that really stuck good because he was a smart son of a gun. Now, if you take the way I hunt, I walk up to him. Okay, that's going to educate a deer. You're going to have a smart deer. And deer, their curiosity is everything, and it doesn't take long, and you keep walking up to him, and he's going to be a whole new deer in a week. And if you do it every day, and you do it multiple times a day, that bugger's going to be smart. Well, I educate this buck in Vermont. I think he's a 3 or a 4-year-old, and he was a 4-year-old at the time. I come on to him, and I start tracking him, and I start walking up to him and grunting, and he takes off. And then later on, I try to snort wheeze. And then now that's not going to work anymore because I've done it multiple times in one day. That's just telling him I'm coming. Well, I chased this buck for a solid 4 years, and I can't hardly even get a look at the rack at all. And I only see the hind end a few times, and the does screw me a few times, and it's tough, And I only have a few days to hunt him, normally during muzzleloader season, because the rest of the season we're in Maine. So during rifle season in Maine, we have a little trouble at home. My buddy's wife's rig breaks, so we come back home, and while we're at home and he's fixing his wife's rig and whatnot, Taylor and I said, you know what, the oldest buck around that we know of, and I named him the mushroom buck, I said, I just can't get this deer, and he's got to be the oldest buck in the whole state that I know of, and I know lots and lots of hunters, and I got plenty of information, and it's like, you know what, let's go seal the deal, and I'm pretty sure he's still there. So most of my boys, I taught them how to hunt, and they spent the majority of their hunting in Maine and New Hampshire, upper part of New Hampshire and Pittsburgh. I think nearly all of them shot their first deer up there. We start hunting Vermont a little bit, and they're used to big woods, and now we're moving into smaller woods, and this is a pretty good-sized chunk of land, probably 8,000 or 10,000 acres that we're in. And this buck is using this one ridge pretty steady, so I take the first day with snow. We're I think the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and I take Taylor up in the woods with me. Now I've got a second man. This buck is going to have the radish. We've got to do some cleanup work on him, right? Larry Benoit used to say that. We're going to do some cleanup work on this one buck because he is, and I have educated him. I've smartened him up. But he always seems to stay in this one stretch of woods that's about a mile long, and he normally runs east or west, and he would run to this big chunk of posted land to the east or the big chunk to the west. And whenever I would catch him in the middle, that was my chance to get him. So I'd chase him and whatnot, and then he'd end up either going east or west, and we had a routine down, and the buck would run in the same places over and over. So if any buck repeats himself over and over, that's bad for him. So I teach Taylor the land in the first day, and we pretty near shoot him on the first day. I get 25 yards from that thing, and I can't quite get a shot, and the doe gets me, and away they go. But Taylor's waiting, and I put him in the right places, and we almost get him. Following day, we go back out again, only for a little while in the morning. It's Thanksgiving. And again, almost get him again. But there's a doe in heat in the middle, and it's working good. So I said, boy, this is it. And Taylor tells me, okay, today's the day. So we saddle up one more time, and this is day 3. And we pretty near shot him every single day. And on day 3, we do the same thing again. He pulls the same routine. The doe comes fairly close to Taylor, but the buck swings low. And I got pretty close to him in this big clear cut of slash and stuff, and almost sealed the deal right there. And I was hunting him, but if he gets up, this is where he's headed. So I let Taylor know he's coming, and of course the deer gets by Taylor and gets onto the posters. So we're kind of done. And I said, you know what? Let's just wait here for a minute. So we stand there on the side, and we just wait, and nothing much is happening. And we're pretty high up. I want to say 2,600 feet up. And the doe swings down the hill and happens to come back off, and she runs back into the center where we're good hunting again, back into our mile stretch. So Taylor and I wait about 10 minutes, and then we start down the hill. Now, I've got my video camera with me, and I just as soon have Taylor shoot this buck as me. Doesn't matter, but we're hunting together. And we swing down the hill, and sure enough, there's the tracks right there. And I said, oh, here we go, right here. They're right here someplace. So we moved down through the little bit of spruce and onto this shelf. And the buck, I can see a deer right in front of us, and it's the buck. And he kangaroos probably 8 or 10, jumps, and I holler at him, hey! And he comes to a stop and looks back. And then I grunt. First I had to stop him. Then I give him something to listen to, and he just stands there. So Taylor's scrambling, and I'm like, don't miss. Okay, this is 5 years worth of work. So both of us are standing there with our rifles. And I'm watching that buck, and I finally got him in my crosshairs all this time, but I know he's in his crosshairs. And I said, don't miss, because if you do, this one's coming in. So the two of us are standing there with our rifles up, and Taylor pulls the trigger, and I watch that deer's hide shake, and I said, oh, he's done. And I put my safety back on and lower the rifle, and the deer kangaroos a little ways and then tips over. And that's when, by then, I had the camcorder on, and all of you can watch what happens next on YouTube, because we've got that hunt,
nice.
The tail end of it. And us walking up to that deer, and he says to me, Dad, I'm so sorry I shot your deer. And I'm like, shut up, we got to go over and look at that thing. It was awesome. And he really was the king. And to have a 9-year-old in Vermont, I mean, you're talking a quarter of a % of the deer in the state, to make it to that age is very, very few.
Right.
That's a rare buck.
Right. Jim, how about you? What's your favorite and best hunt?
Well, I don't know if it's my favorite or my best, but what I'm going to tell is my biggest deer.
Okay.
It was a deer. It wasn't far from my house. It was a swamp that I used to hunt regularly, and I used to take mountain bike rides down this trail. It would take me through all these places, and I'd look for the tracks that crossed the trail, and there was one place where it was kind of low, so there was a lot of, dirt bike trails and just grooves and everything where it kept the leaves away, and I kept going through this one section. I was seeing this huge set of tracks, and I hunted there one year. I never seen the deer, but I knew it had to be around there somewhere, and the next year I went back there, and I went back to that area early in August. I can remember going back there on the bike and seeing the huge tracks in the mud there again. And I'm saying, man, there's a big deer around here someplace, And so I decided I was going to hunt a new spot over there. And I went in there with a tassel gland from a deer I had shot in Connecticut. It was a 7-pointer. And I walked along the edge of the swamp and came back up to a tree that in case the deer came out along that edge, it'd follow me to the tree and hopefully show up underneath my tree in legal shooting light. And I went up to one tree as I went through a hole in the stone wall, and I realized there was way too many branches for me to climb the tree and get the height that I wanted where the deer would preferably not pick me out in the tree. And it went from pine trees to hardwood trees, and so I walked back through the hole in the stone wall and back into a pine tree that I climbed up, and I got up in the tree. And just before dark, it was maybe 5 minutes of legal shooting light left. I heard a branch break in the swamp, so I stopped and I kept listening, and didn't hear anything. And I was just getting ready to get down, and I heard another branch break. And I said, "Oh man, that's a deer for sure. They don't break branches this late at night. That's a big animal moving." And next thing you know, I can hear a deer walking, and the deer it's coming right along the edge of the stone wall. And as it got to the edge of the stone wall, it hit my scent trail. And I was like, oh, man, this thing's smelling my tracks. He's right there. And he started following my tracks to the end of the place where I had walked through the hole in the stone wall to the tree that was actually had too many branches in. And he stopped there. I'm sitting there listening. And now I turn around. He comes right down through the hole in the stone wall and walks straight down to the bottom of my tree. And I'm like, oh, man. I says, but I don't even know what it is. I mean, it could be a spike horn, a 4-pointer. I have no idea because it's after legal shooting light, So in that situation, I don't care what it is. I sit there till the deer leaves, and I wait 20 minutes after I can't hear it anymore. So I climbed down out of the tree and went back home. I came back there 3 days later, walked over to that spot, and I could see that it was that deer. The tracks were huge. And I said, oh, man, he came from that way. I'm going to move down another 80 yards down that edge of the swamp. So that's what I did that day. And so I moved down another 80 yards, and got up, climbed up in the tree. I'm sitting there. Again, I used that same tassel gland from the deer I had killed. Each time I do this, I take the tassel gland home, put it back in the freezer. And I walked along that edge of the swamp again and came up and climbed another tree. Then, again, just before dark, I hear a branch break. And I'm saying, that's a branch break, and that could be a deer in there, So I'm sitting there, and I'm just getting ready to leave again, and I can hear the thing walking again, and here it comes. And I had called a few times, given a couple fawn mews, and it walked by probably 20 yards downwind of my scent trail, and it stopped, and then it turned and came right to my scent trail again, and it stopped right at the bottom of my tree, and it's standing there. And I circle my tree before I climb it. This way you actually know they're following you track for track. He circled my whole tree in the pitch darkness. I'm basically sitting there, and then he started to make a rub. And I'm like, oh, man, he's rubbing a tree. Now I know it's a buck, So I waited for him to leave again. I snuck down out of the tree, and I left, and I went back, and I came back another 3 days later and set up in there at that same tree. Nothing came by. Came back another 3 days later and set up, and this time I horn rattled, used the same tassel gland from that same exact deer, and this time it came by probably 30 yards away on the upwind side, and he never crossed my scent trail. But I know as soon as he went up another 80 yards where I took a turn on the trail I came in on, he would probably cross it right there. And so I was like, I promised my wife I wouldn't sit in the woods for an hour and a half after dark because there's a deer underneath my tree. And I promised we would meet these people that we were supposedly going out to eat with, and I won't be late. Well, so I says, you know what, I have to get down out of this tree. And I do another thing where I drag a stick, and the animals don't know what I am, So I'm walking up the trail, I'm getting closer and closer, and all of a sudden the deer's maybe 10 feet in front of me. It takes off running and crashes off. I'm like, man. I know it didn't smell me, but even still, I wasn't sure if it knew what I was, And I says, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to get this deer. It seems like it's a pretty smart one, and usually jumping them sometimes, they figure out what you are, and they don't show up in the same spot again, So I hunted there one more time. I didn't see nothing. Then I went to another spot. I had seen like 4 does that morning, and there was a buck chasing him. I could hear him grunting in the swamp, but I never seen the buck. But I do remember seeing the deer running. That evening it was cloudy, rainy, and overcast. And I says, you know what? If this deer is going to come out of that swamp on any day, it's going to be today because it's dark. He may actually show himself in the dark. And so I went back to that spot, parked my car, took my mountain bike down the trail again, and got to one spot, and I stopped right in the corner where I had jumped that deer. And this is 2 days later, and I could see where that deer turned around. It's in a place where there's a lot of dirt bikes, and I could see the thing turned around and came back and followed me out of the woods. I said, this deer doesn't know that I'm a human. So I went back to that spot. Again, I walked along the edge of the swamp, climbed the same tree I'd climbed the third time, and just before dark, it's rainy, it's overcast, it's cloudy. I was convincing myself there's maybe 3 minutes of legal shooting light left, and I says, I'm not going to kill this deer. This thing knows what I am. It detected me off that track. Maybe he actually walked up that trail and was coming back when I actually met him on the trail dragging the stick. I just picked up my arrow to take it up and stood up, and I heard a branch break. I turns and he looks, and there he is. He's 15 yards from the bottom of my tree stand, and he's following my scent trail. And people's definition of a J hook, what they say on TV or whatever you guys come up with, my different definition of a J hook was something I've been doing for I don't know how long. It's a place where I can't circle the tree I plan on climbing because it's too thick. So I'll walk past the tree I'm going to climb, make a complete J, and then come back to the tree. So either way the deer follows me, it should give me an angled away shot, you know? And I looked, and I just couldn't believe that it was that close, and I could see its neck was as thick as its body, and I'm like, oh, my God, this is definitely a 200-pound deer. I know it is. It has a nice rack, and I could see the point sticking up there like, 8 or 10 inches long, and I'm saying, oh, please don't look up at me. Please don't look up at me. And he starts walking out. He got halfway away to the point where I wanted to shoot him at like 12 yards at the bend in the J, and he stopped. He started sniffing the air, and all of a sudden he could smell the other tracks that were basically 15 feet away, and he crossed over before he got to the end of the J, turned around, smelled my tracks again, and walked straight to the bottom of my tree and looked right up at me. So I'm standing there not moving. I'm saying, please don't move, don't run, rah, rah, rah. And he stood there about maybe another minute. He turned and started walking back out, and then he got about 15 feet from the bottom of my tree. Then I knew I was going to get a shot at him. I stood up and drew back all in one motion, and as he stopped at the end of the J, I put the 20-yard pin on him. He was actually straight away from me, and I let the arrow go, and I stuck him right in the back, and it came and hit him in the front shoulder, but the arrow never came out. And he took off running. I watched him run. I called to him a few times, but he didn't stop. That's another trick I teach you in the DVD, trying to put 2 arrows in the same deer before it's out of bow range. And I could see him, and it was just the last 3 minutes of legal shooting light. I seen him for about maybe 80 yards, and then his tail went down, and I couldn't see him. I kept looking in that direction, and so I waited 10 minutes. I got down out of the tree. I went to look where the arrow was, and I didn't get a complete penetration, and usually I do. I shoot around 80 pounds, and it almost passes through every time. And I ran the bow along the edge of the ground. I didn't want to turn a flashlight on because in case it was not hit really good, I don't want any of these deer to know that they could be a hunter following them. So I decided right then and there that I wasn't going to look for the deer that night. When I didn't have good penetration, wasn't positive where I hit it, and the arrow wasn't sticking in the ground, I figured I had better off chance of finding this deer with a half-decent blood trail because there wasn't any blood right where the arrow should have been, and that's usually right off the bat, it should be a good blood trail, once a shot like that. And so I came back the next day. It had rained most of the night. I came back with Keith, and me and him looked for that deer. We followed tracks till about 100 yards with no blood. And then we couldn't figure out which way it went. And I remember looking at one crow I could see in a tree about 200 yards to my left. And I said, man, he could be right underneath that tree. But there was a swamp another 90 yards to the direction he was running. My eyes, he's running back to that swamp. That's what I really thought he was doing. So I actually had my son with me and my buddy Keith. We looked till probably 5 hours that morning. Never found any blood, never found anything. And we're coming back to the place, and we crossed the street, And one of my neighbors, or not neighbors, one of the people around the edge of the piece of wood that was hunting comes out and he says, "Are you guys looking for a deer?" I says, "Yeah, I am." He says, "Well, in the middle of that field out there around all those houses, there's a dead deer in the middle of it." I'm like, "Huh?" I says, "Does it have any points?" "Oh, yeah, it's got big points on it, you know." And the deer had actually ran towards that swamp and then turned and ran another 150 yards, and they had put houses around this field maybe 5 years earlier. So it was like one humongous backyard and didn't have any fences. So everybody woke up that morning looking in their backyard, and there was a huge dead deer in the middle of it, and it was laying there. It was 212 pounds, and that was one of my favorite deer, and it was pretty exciting for me.
That's a good story.
Yeah.
That's a very good story. Dean, bring it home. What's your favorite and best deer hunting story?
Well, mine happens to be, it was my best buck and best experience ever. I had seen this particular buck. It was a nice 10, just a giant, and I'd seen him with my bow twice. And that particular day, it was the opening day of muzzleloader season. So it was really, really windy. It was pretty crazy. So I was trying to do some calling and such, and I knew this buck was probably within 200 yards of me. So I was trying to get him to, and he was probably hung up. He was laid down. So I was kind of joking to myself, and I was making some calls, some grunts, and before you know it, I had called in, for some reason, a couple large toms, and I was chuckling to myself that I didn't know that a grunt call could call turkeys in. So I was kind of chuckling. The wind was blowing really hard, and I heard what I thought was a deer get up, and it was pretty windy, and so I tried a couple more soft grunts, and this deer took maybe one step every 2 minutes or so. This deer was really taking his time, but I was really confident that it was this buck, because I kind of had a pretty good idea where he was. Well, it turned out he kind of broke cover, and he was trying to circle me. And as soon as I got a look at him, I knew that I wouldn't have another opportunity. So I snapped off a shot. It looked like good penetration, and the deer bolted really, really quick. And it was right just before, maybe about 2 minutes before dark. And I was about a half a mile from the house up on a ridge. So I said, well, I'm going to give this deer just a little bit of time and go back down to the house and, put my muzzle loader up and stuff like that. Well, my wife, Shelly, if anybody knows Shelly, she's kind of a tiny little thing, and she's always been on me. We've been married for 8 or 10 years, and she always wondered why do you get out of bed, Dean? Why do you go out and freeze your butt off? Why do you do this? So she comes pulling in, and it's dark out, and I'm pacing back and forth in the yard. So I got to give Mark a call. He's a big guy. I said, this is a good buck. He's over 200. And Shelly goes, you shot a buck, didn't you? And I said, yeah, I did. And I said, I got to go call Mark. And she goes, well, don't call Mark. She goes, can I go with you? And I'm like, Shelly, I says, this isn't really, your idea right now. And she goes, no, really. She goes, I want to see why you do this. And I'm like, okay, grab 4 mag lights and some boots and let's go. So it was dark, and we hike up this ridge about a half mile, and we get to this swamp, and it's probably about 8 inches of water, and I cross it, and I look back at her, and she's looking at me. And I'm like, well, come on. And she looks down at her shoes, and I said, I thought I told you to get boots. And she goes, they're hikers. And I'm like, okay, they're hikers. So hop on. She jumps on my shoulders. We cross the swamp, and I've got blood on both sides, and we're about 100 yards out. And she taps me on the shoulder. It's pitch black out. And she goes, he's right there. I'd walked right by the deer. We've all done it, And it's like, he's right there. She goes, what do I do? And I said, well, go down and lay down beside him and touch him. She goes, what? I said, go down, lay down beside him and touch him. And so she did that, and all of a sudden her eyeballs got this big. It was remarkable. I go, what do you feel? She goes, I feel the deer. And I said, you do, don't you? And she goes, yeah, I do. So she goes, now what do we do? I said, well, let's gut the deer out, and we'll drag him out of here. Well, it was a pretty good drag. It was nasty. It was all these buckbrush, briars and stuff, and I'm pulling on the deer antler, and Shelly's pulling on my finger, and she's all probably 95 pounds. So I'm like, this isn't going to work. I said, I'll take my shirt off. We'll cover up the deer, keep the coyotes off him, and we'll go get the sled. And Shelly goes, I'm not leaving my deer. I go, what do you mean? She goes, give me your knife and your flashlight, and I'm going to stay here with the deer. So I said, here's the knife, and here's the flashlight. I'll see you in about an hour. Off the ridge I go. I come back in an hour, and she's sitting there with that flashlight guarding that deer. Well, it was the coolest thing. Since then, we got off the mountain with the deer, and she gives me this huge hug, and she goes, now I know why you do it. Since then, Shelly's shot 6 bucks, and now I got a great hunting partner, and what a great story. So
great story.
Yeah.
Excellent. Any questions from the audience? The question from the audience is, how do you handle scent control and cover scents?
I don't know.
Yes, I do not cover scent. I try to eliminate scent. So, I mean, I can get in a long-winded explanation, so see me another time. But, I mean, whether it's going through steps to wash your clothes, but I start using ozone now, so I hang all my clothes in a garment closet and run ozone. I mean, it depends on where I'm hunting. It can, you know, if I'm hunting a spot where it's heavily pressured, yeah, I'm pretty obsessed about scent elimination.
What I'll do is, if you have a nice fishing shanty, I'll actually turn that into a closet. All my clothes go in that. My boots stay in like a rubber Tupperware thing, no top on it. I put peat moss in that, moose crap, deer crap, anything that you can find that Mother Nature can throw out there, maybe a little bit of doe urine, and that peat moss works really great. My boots go in the back of my truck. Your boots are the most important thing. And, you know, I'm not filling up my Dodge Ram with my hunting boots on.
Gotcha.
It just doesn't work that way.
Other questions? The question from the audience is, how should we deal with the hunter-to-hunter bashing that occurs on social media?
Every time you see something like that, when I see something like that, no matter what the deer is, I always comment, that's a really nice deer. The problem is, like, too many people want to just blah, 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 blah. I've killed all sorts of small deer, and I know that every deer that somebody shoots, they're proud of. So if somebody does that and you see it, call them out on it before it gets out of control. Just say, that's a really nice deer. Who are you to say, you know, it's not?
Any other comments on that, Rodney?
I see it a lot, right? We're on social media like crazy, and all of us have to be more consciously aware of what we do and how we do it and how other people might see it. Ain't no question about that. In general, I try not to be an anti-anti, right? Because the person who saves the world isn't going to be anti-anything. It's very important that we all not suffer someone else's freedoms. If somebody else chooses a way to live or chooses a way to feel or chooses a way to be, that's their freedom, and we shouldn't suffer that because that's what they want to do, right? If somebody wants to be grumpy, go ahead and be grumpy, right? And obviously sometimes they're good at it and they enjoy it and they choose that to do that every day. Myself, I do my best to change how I behave, and I try and do it to make sure that everybody has feelings, everybody has loves, everybody has likes and dislikes, and we all love to express those, and that's okay. But there comes a time when you have to let a few of those go. There's no doubt that social media will be a huge tackling for the hunting community, for everyone, for humans, period. It's going to be somewhere you have to learn how to communicate, and we have to learn how to let things go or how to maybe support things. And I like to be pro things, not anti, right? I want to be pro something. And everyone's allowed to have opinion, and I suppose there's cheap seats everywhere. But when you're doing things positive and do things that feel right, and if you're miserable or you're complaining or you're whining, there's lots of that. Go ahead. That's your freedom. I won't suffer that, though. It doesn't bother me because my emotions are self-generated, and I try and make sure and keep it that way all the time. And I'll let outside get to me because I build my world. I'm the king of my world, and I try not to let somebody else's feelings override what I've got going on in mine. And I'm always reflecting and reviewing what I do and how I do it. All of us need to kind of up our confidence about that. Social media is definitely going to be a challenge, and it could either save things or break things. But, you know, hey, that's life, right? Difficulty mixed with opportunity.
Last question. The question from the audience is, if you could give one sentence of advice to other deer hunters, what would it be?
I would say just keep passing it on. Ultimately, if we don't, it's going to go away. Anybody who has anything to do with the outdoors, most people that don't understand hunting. If you take 2 minutes to explain it to them, it's amazing what you can get accomplished. So share it. Don't be afraid to talk about it. It beats the hell out of a meat market aisle, and they look at it differently. People don't understand most of the time what they're eating. And if you tell people, pass this gift on, because that's what it is, it goes a long ways. And there's still a lot of us. And if we continue to work together, I think we can continue to grow the industry.
Any other comments?
Stop trying to be happy and be self-generating joy, right? Happiness is something that we have to get something in order to be happy. And things have to be a certain way for us to be happy. Leave the happiness behind and look for the joy in life. Look for the miracles and the beauty and the thankfulness, the forgiveness part of it, and you'll be good to go.
Gotcha. Neil?
I guess my thing would be persistence. On Jim's story, he shot his buck when he didn't think there was one coming in. He'd already put his arrows away, and that's when it's probably going to happen. If you play it out to the very end, you put your time in, you're passionate about it, when you least expect it, that's when, that deer is going to step out. So I would just say be persistent and don't give up.
I'm involved in a lot of different circles. Like I write short stories for children, which they involve bullying. So I go to schools to speak to children, and a lot of those children don't hunt. So a lot of times I'll wear a hat, and it's the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation's, symbol, and it says "Pass it on" it. And I just try to pass on, what I know, is good for me and it works for me. And I try to encourage them to experience the outdoors if they haven't experienced it. And as far as like the hunters out there, I just tell them if they want to be successful, then just be patient and persistent. If you're patient and persistent, then you're bound to have luck go in your favor. It's like, I'm not a great hunter, but I can guarantee you that I probably spend more time than anybody in this room, maybe other than these people, in the woods, and that's why I kill deer.
Gotcha. Well, excellent, guys. I had a great time. Dean, can you tell us where to find more information about you if we have more questions from the audience?
Sure. We're just over here, our booth's right inside. If you want to just stop, have a chat, share a story. You can reach us at www.team-northwoods.com. Pretty easy, team-northwoods.com.
Excellent. Rodney, where can we find you?
MountainDeerTaxidermy.com, and also on YouTube under Rodney Elmer and Mountain Deer Taxidermy.
Excellent. Jim?
You can find me on YouTube under Jim's Tricks, and you can find me at jimstricks.com.
There we go. Technology then. All right. Neil?
I told you guys.
Today, if you want to see the mount that I have here of the buck that I hunted for the 1,490 days, that's over at Todd's booth, Backcountry Bucks. So if you want to stop over there, say hi, and check that out. But normally, just look me up on Facebook, Neil Pendleton. Find me and send me a friend request.
Excellent.
There are a lot of places you can find me, so I'll name all of them. If you can remember them, then that's good for you. If not, you can come by the booth. I'll give you a card, and you can go from there. But you can find me on Facebook. I'm on there. My personal page, I have an elk on my back, so you can friend request me on there. If you want stuff involved with my hunting, I have 2 pages on Facebook. One is Backcountry Bucks. The other one is ADK Trail Cam. And I own 2 websites. One is my name, toddmead.com, and the other one is adktrailcam.com. So you can find me in any of those places. And if you ever have any questions, my phone number is on my business card. You can just feel free to call me.
Awesome. Bobby, where can we find you?
I usually make it so people can't. But I'm on Facebook just about everywhere. I'm sure everybody's seen me somewhere or another. But other than that, I'm not famous, so I don't have any of those .com things.
Awesome. And if you guys want to listen to the podcast, I'm going to try to re-air some of this stuff. You can reach us at www.bigbuckregistry.com. And if you tune into any podcast directories like Apple, Stitcher, iTunes, or on Blueberry, we're also now on Spotify. So you'll just type in Big Buck Registry, you'll find us there. So everybody have a good time?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everybody. thank you to all the participants in the panel for making this come together for the 2018 Deer Summit, New England Deer Summit. Also, special thanks to Jeff Thornton, who helped put this together and was my right-hand man and audio tech as we recorded this show and made it possible for the audience to listen a little more clearly. And thank you to Fred Allard, the director of the Rockingham Hunting and Fishing Expo, for asking me to MC the event and handpicking the panelists for this year's summit. Dusty, do we have a Chubby Tines tip of the week?
Yeah, Jay, we got a Chubby Tines tip of the week this week.
The Chubby Tines tip of the week is sponsored by Morse's Sporting Goods. Firearms, used firearms, bows, used bows, located at 85 Kentucky Falls Road in Hillsborough, New Hampshire. Give Jim a call at 603-464-3444, morsessportinggoods.com. Your dollars go further in New Hampshire. There's no sales tax. Morse's Sporting Goods.
Hey, we're getting into the snow season, and a lot of people around the United States, Canada, and different areas are starting to see snow, and that's going to be a great resource for you to utilize as far as the hunger factor. And we get into 3 to 5 to 8 inches of snow, the deer are going to start getting hungry. All the leaves are gone off the trees. They're going to start on a bark diet. And they're going to start really traveling around to find that food source. If you can get on that food source, acorns or a food plot or a cut soybean or cornfield, or if you're able to bait deer, if you can get on that food source late season during the snow, rule of thumb here in Ohio, usually about the third day is when they get the most active after a major snowstorm. Yeah, they're going to move that first and second day after, but it seems like that third day after a snowstorm, they really start to kind of move around and try to find that food source. And if they got that food source established, and if you can get set up on it, man, you're going to be able to capitalize on that snow and move in and get a shot off on a really nice deer or put meat in the freezer for you. Just, use your head, think like the deer. The deer got to eat no different than you and I's got to eat. So get in there, find that food source, get that snow on the ground, and hunt on that food source.
Dusty, where can we find you when you're not hanging out here in the studios with me?
Shoot me an email, dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. You can look me up on Instagram and Twitter @ChasingAntler, Facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. Jay, where can the people reach out to you when you're not on the mic?
Likewise, you can shoot me an email, jay@bigbuckregistry.com, and you can visit us on Facebook, facebook.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Twitter, which is twitter.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Instagram, instagram.com/bigbuckregistry, and YouTube, which is youtube.com/bigbuckregistry. On YouTube, you can listen to all of our podcasts in their entirety. As far as videos are concerned, it's a boring video, but the audio content is there, so you can actually listen to our podcast. You can also listen to all of our live shows that we've done on Thursday nights when we do them, and we've gone back and re-interviewed a lot of our previous guests we had on the show just to put a face to a voice, let's put it that way. You can always listen to our show on other places as well, not just YouTube. We're found on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, and Blueberry. And if you would like to submit a buck to our page for consideration and be featured on our page in front of 250,000 diehard deer hunting fans, all you have to do is go to bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck, and all of the instructions will be right there. I think that's pretty much everywhere we're at. So I think that's a wrap, Dusty.
That's a whole lot of big buck, Jay.
Sure is. I'm Jay Scott.
I'm Dusty Phillips.
And this is the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. We'll see you next week.